Chapter 1. Jin Tae-kyung trudged along the street, sweat dripping from his face. Each step felt heavier than the last as he climbed the stairs, panting under the weight of a virtual reality machine strapped to his back. The device was massive, nearly twice his size. His face flushed red from the effort, and his legs trembled. He told himself he only needed to reach the 4th floor to finish this job. Eventually, he arrived at his small apartment, managing to drag the bulky machine inside. As soon as he entered, his roommate, Song Jin-ho, took one look at the console and criticized him. Jin-ho dismissed it as trash, uninterested in hearing otherwise. Tae-kyung stood there, disappointed but silent. He had brought it home hoping it would be worth something, not to be mocked. Tae-kyung thought of money. He needed it. He had no other reason to lug that thing across town. Jin-ho laughed, pretending to ease the tension by blaming their harsh words on friendly banter. Tae-kyung snapped. His glare turned sharp, and his tone darkened. Jin-ho stepped back, visibly startled. Attempting to calm him down, he reminded Tae-kyung of the law. Awakened individuals could not harm ordinary citizens. Jin-ho quickly added that Tae-kyung, as an F-rank hunter, barely qualified as awakened. That only fueled Tae-kyung's anger. Jin-ho feigned confusion, asking if he had been drinking, trying to downplay the insult. Tae-kyung had no choice but to restrain himself, though his frustration boiled beneath the surface. Jin-ho then mocked the potential consequences. Assaulting a citizen could ruin Tae-kyung's already shaky life. That thought silenced him. He recalled how his captain had once thanked him for his dedication. Tae-kyung had become a hunter to follow his late father's footsteps. He lacked talent, yet through sheer effort, he managed to cover his mother's hospital bills and support his sister. Now it all felt meaningless. Jin-ho noticed Tae-kyung's silence and appeared slightly regretful. He tried to apologize, but only offered a half-hearted excuse. Tae-kyung demanded he make it up to him with a drink, claiming that was what seniors did. Jin-ho scowled but eventually gave in. They drank late into the night. On January 1, 2015, humanity met something far worse than the New Year's cold. A gate connecting their world to another. These gates, known as dungeons, began appearing across the globe, unleashing creatures never seen before. Awakened individuals fought back. After many battles, they defeated the demon lord Asmodeus on January 1, 2020. That day became known as Victory Day. Since then, monsters ceased appearing, and the era of hunters began. These individuals, ranked by strength, entered dungeons to kill monsters and sell the rewards. Tae-kyung, a lowly F-rank hunter, had little value in this new world. After a heavy meal, he carried the drunken Jin-ho to bed, slapped his face to wake him, and tried to clean up the mess. Jin-ho had vomited all over Tae-kyung's shirt. Disgusted, he took it off and threw it into Jin-ho's face. With his patience gone, he dropped to the floor in defeat. He noticed the virtual reality machine again. He considered selling it to buy snacks but dismissed the idea out of laziness. Still curious, he pressed a few buttons. The chamber door opened, revealing a manual. He skimmed through it, surprised to see the production date was January 1, 2020, which was the day the war ended. He assumed it was a misprint. The manual contained a warning: dying in the simulation meant dying in real life. Tae-kyung scoffed at the idea. He tossed the manual aside and lay on the floor, trying to sleep. Jin-ho's loud snoring made it impossible. In frustration, Tae-kyung looked at the machine again. He thought it might be soundproof. Without giving it much thought, he climbed inside, put on the headset, and leaned back. At last, silence. As he relaxed, Tae-kyung reflected on his miserable situation. Without a guild, he had to pay high commission fees just to take on quests. Most of his earnings went to support his family. He felt like a disposable tool in society. Despite everything, he only wished they trusted him. Sleep came quickly. The machine activated automatically and began registration. Tae-kyung did not respond in time, so the system created an account for him. It finalized the data, confirmed him as a player, and launched the simulation. He had entered the world of Murm. A cold wind brushed his skin. Tae-kyung slowly opened his eyes, confused. He sat up, shivering, and noticed someone beside him. To his shock, a woman with pale skin and pink hair was lying next to him. Neither of them was covered. He panicked, scanning the unfamiliar room. The girl stirred, rubbing her eyes and speaking in a language he didn't understand. Tae-kyung stared at her, bewildered. He assumed she might be Chinese, based on the sounds she made. He tried asking where he was, but the language barrier prevented any real communication. Moments later, a system message appeared in front of him. It notified him of unread messages and asked if he wanted to read them. Tae Kyung, startled and irritated, punched the screen. Chapter 2. Jin Tae Kyung sat in stunned silence, unable to comprehend what had just happened. Confusion settled deep in his chest. Across from him, the pink-haired girl named Walwa eyed him cautiously. Her gaze made him uneasy. She finally let out a sigh and commented on his strange behavior, calling him Master Jin and expressing her confusion. Tae Kyung felt a flicker of amusement. Even though it was just a game, being addressed as Master Jin felt oddly satisfying. He asked how exactly he was acting strangely. Walwa shrugged, admitting she didn't fully understand. According to her, he looked unstable, possibly even mad. He seemed different, especially since he was talking to her so directly. Before Tae Kyung could respond, a system notification appeared. The tutorial mission had begun. The interface displayed his quest: gather information and adapt to the environment. It was listed as a beginner-only, chain-type quest. Completion would unlock access to character profiles, inventory, and skills. He accepted the mission, though his expression remained puzzled. Most games began by teaching players how to fight weak monsters or use the interface. Instead, this one threw him into a strange world, instructing him to blend in. Deciding to start with information gathering, he turned to Walwa. He asked what she knew about him. Walwa chuckled softly and admitted the question was an unusual one. She hesitated before mentioning that rumors about him were widely known. Tae Kyung urged her to share them. His eagerness startled her, but she eventually agreed, saying the rumors didn't seem to affect him. He brushed it off and told her to go on. After their conversation, he managed to gather the information required by the quest. Tae Kyung learned that he was in the central city of Shaanxi province, in a place called Taiyuan. The brothel he had woken up in was named Crimson Flower. Walwa was one of the higher-ranking courtesans there. His character, Jin Tae Kyung, was a 20-year-old and the youngest son of the prestigious Jin family, who lived in Taiyan. The Jin family held influence in Shaanxi's 11th district, known for defending against bandits and supporting citizens during crises. This had earned them a reputation for nobility and respect. Upon completing the mission, a system message confirmed his success. It unlocked further details about his character. Tae Kyung received the title of noble son and gained access to his profile. Reading through it, he grinned. He came from wealth. The realization lifted his spirits. Walwa, however, mentioned that his family had personal issues. This caught his attention. She explained that the Mount Heng sword sect was attempting to seize political control from the Jin family in the province. Internal conflicts plagued the family. She lowered her voice and added that the third son of the Jin family was a troublesome figure. Tae Kyung crossed his arms and muttered in frustration. He wasn't surprised. Every rich family seemed to have someone like that. As he continued speaking, he began to sweat. Something felt off. He asked how many children the Jin family had. Walwa answered without hesitation, 10. Tae Kyung froze. That number didn't include him. The realization struck hard. A moment later, the system displayed another notification. He had earned a new title, Family Shame. His name, once proudly associated with nobility, now carried a stain. Tae Kyung chuckled weakly and clenched his fist, tapping the table to steady himself. It didn't matter. This was just a game. Titles meant nothing outside the simulation. His only goal was to complete the mission. He shifted focus to the second part of the quest, environmental adaptation. Walwa studied his expression and appeared concerned. She commented again on his strange behavior, suggesting they rest. Tae Kyung placed a hand on his head, trying to understand what he had gotten himself into. Doubts clouded his thoughts, yet he stood up with resolve. He needed to find a job or at least earn some money within the game. Before leaving, he glanced back at Walwa. Despite everything, he felt grateful. Even if it was all virtual, there was a sense of comfort in her presence. A faint smile formed on his lips as he walked away. Once alone, Tae Kyung tried to log out of the game. To his horror, nothing happened. Panic surged through him. He remembered the manual that came with the virtual reality machine. It had stated that logout was not possible at will, and dying in the game would result in real death. Fear twisted in his stomach. He stumbled back, eyes wide, mind racing. The weight of the situation crashed down on him all at once. He began to thrash around, overwhelmed by the terrifying truth. He was trapped. Chapter 3. Night had fallen as the horse-drawn carriage moved steadily along the forest's edge. An elderly man held the reins while Jin Tae-kyung sat inside the cabin, lost in thought. For 3 days, he had tried everything he could think of to log out of the game, but nothing worked. The reality was undeniable. He was trapped inside a virtual martial arts simulation called Murm. According to the manual, the only way to exit was by fulfilling specific game conditions. Dying in the game meant dying in real life. At first, Tae-kyung had hoped that someone from the outside would find a way to rescue him. After days of misery, he accepted the truth. To escape, he had to focus on quests, level up, and survive. That meant finding a safe area where he could receive help and build his strength. A faint smile appeared on his face as he recalled such a place from the game world. He gathered his resolve and opened the system's taskboard. A prompt appeared, asking if he wanted to begin Tutorial Mission, Part 2. Tae-kyung confirmed without hesitation. The system displayed the mission details. He needed to complete his unfinished profile, distribute status points, and equip a basic item. The objectives seemed manageable. Tae-kyung opened his character profile. The panel revealed his current state: Level 10 Martial Artist, 3rd Class Warrior, no reputation, and 2 titles, Noble Son and Family Shame. Each stat, including Strength, Endurance, Agility, Intelligence, Charm, and Aura, had 10 points. 100 status points remained for distribution. The Noble Son title added 5 points to all stats and granted 50 bonus points, while the Family Shame title reduced his reputation by 50. Disappointed, Tae-kyung muttered to himself. A noble son with such low stats hardly matched the expectations set by the Jin family name. Still, he tried to stay optimistic. He considered raising his aura but was warned that it could only increase through training, potions, or special tools. Deciding to prioritize survival, he distributed 40 points to strength, 30 to endurance, and 30 to agility. When asked to confirm, Tae-kyung accepted. Instantly, the remaining points dropped to 0, and a wave of energy surged through his body. His muscles tightened, his stance grew firmer, and for the first time since arriving, he felt truly alive. This sensation reminded him of the moment he awakened 7 years ago as a hunter. The system notified him of his promotion to rank 2 warrior. With a clearer focus, he moved on to the next step, distributing skill points. Opening the skill panel, Tae-kyung found that his family's martial arts, spear techniques, and footwork were all unavailable. His previous training had been forgotten. With 100 skill points to use, he needed a new strategy. Internal force relied on tendons and energy flow, while external force was grounded in muscle and bone strength. Tae-kyung's fighting style as an F-rank hunter leaned heavily on external physical combat. He understood it best. With that in mind, he allocated 60 points to external force and 40 to internal force. The system asked for confirmation, and he agreed. Immediately, his body underwent a visible transformation. Muscles formed, veins surfaced, and strength surged through him. Pain accompanied the growth, but Tae-kyung gritted his teeth through it. Sweat poured from his body as he panted, drenched and exhausted. His frail frame had turned into a solid warrior's build. Looking down, he acknowledged the change with satisfaction. This world was different from reality. Here, he had control and strength. Encouraged by the transformation, he opened the inventory. Only one item appeared: a traditional robe. It had no special effects and was made from a light yet durable fabric. Tae-kyung equipped it immediately, then ordered his old clothes to be stored. Though unimpressive, the inventory system itself seemed useful. The mission tracker confirmed completion of Part 2. He had now gained access to Part 3. The reward included a 2nd-class spear. It had no rank restriction, a 5% chance to cause bleeding, and was sharp enough to cut skin easily. Disappointed by the lack of advanced equipment, Tae-kyung still equipped the weapon. A new notification appeared. Part 3 of the tutorial mission had begun. The system warned him to prepare. Confused, Tae-kyung looked out the carriage window when the driver called to him. They had a problem. Outside, a group of bandits blocked the road. The system activated a new quest. As a beginner, Tae-kyung was tasked with defeating the attackers. The reward promised full recovery, while failure meant death. Realizing the danger, he stared at the group in disbelief. The so-called small problem was now a matter of life and death. Chapter 4. Jang Sam was a notorious bandit who had never left the 5 famous mountain ranges. By the age of 20, he had already become the leader of a gang, extorting travelers for tolls. On that evening, a horse-drawn carriage traveled quietly along the forest road. The driver, an old man, turned back and informed Jin Tae-kyung that they had been ambushed. There were 6 of them. Tae-kyung froze in fear. He ducked into the carriage, his thoughts racing. The old man, however, remained strangely calm and remarked that robbers like these were not uncommon, though it was unusual to see them in this area. According to him, outside the 5 mountain ranges, bandits rarely dared to attack martial arts clans. With a smug expression, he declared that these robbers had made a grave mistake by targeting the Jin family's territory. Tae-kyung found himself questioning everything. The driver's composure made no sense. Why was he so relaxed? Moments earlier, Jang Sam and his gang had spotted the carriage. Scarred and grinning, he raised his axe and ordered his men to stop it. The driver responded with open defiance, warning them they would regret their actions. Jang Sam demanded to see the passenger's face, convinced he was someone important. The driver obliged and approached Tae-kyung with exaggerated respect, addressing him as young master. Tae-kyung grew pale. The man insisted that the bandits needed to see his face to understand the power they were up against. He claimed Tae-kyung was a famous martial artist, once hailed as a genius swordsman at the age of 20. Confused, Tae-kyung denied the claim. He was not the second son, Jin Mu-kyung, as the man declared, but Jin Tae-kyung, the third son. As soon as Tae-kyung clarified, the driver collapsed from shock. He fell to the ground, unconscious, overwhelmed by the truth. Tae-kyung sighed, realizing he had overestimated the man. He had mistaken him for a martial arts master. Across from them, Jang Sam and his men burst into laughter. The bandit leader raised his gleaming axe and mocked him. He didn't care if Tae-kyung was the third son, he would spare him if he obeyed. Tae-kyung recalled his current mission. It was a beginner-only quest requiring him to defeat the bandits. Failure would mean death. The odds were troubling. He had faced goblins before, but these enemies were human and unpredictable. One of the robbers hurled an axe at him. Tae-kyung reacted too late. The weapon struck the ground near him. Thankfully, the damage was minimal. As he assessed the situation, he realized most of the robbers, aside from Jang Sam, looked weaker than the goblins he had defeated earlier. Confidence returned. He raised his hands in surrender, planning his next move. Jang Sam mocked the gesture, believing Tae-kyung had accepted defeat. The others joined in, taunting him. They spoke of the Jin family's disgrace, laughing at the idea of a failed son groveling before them. Tae-kyung remained silent, biding his time. As he stepped forward, a surge of heat rose through his body. He recognized the sensation immediately. It was the release of internal energy. Planting his foot firmly on the ground, he triggered a shockwave that cracked the earth. Without warning, he launched himself toward the group, his body radiating a pale glow. Within seconds, his spear cut through the chaos. Moments later, blood coated the weapon. Jang Sam lay motionless on the ground, a deep wound across his chest. Tae-kyung turned to the remaining robbers. His eyes burned with intensity. They dropped their weapons and fell to their knees, pleading for mercy. The system interface appeared. It confirmed the completion of his objective. The bandits, having lost their leader, had surrendered. Tae-kyung received full recovery, a reputation boost of 10 points, and confirmation that Tutorial Quest Part 3 was complete. The next quest in the tutorial series was now unlocked. Chapter 5. The conversation between Jin Tae-kyung and Jin Ho had taken place not long before Tae-kyung found himself trapped inside the world of Murm. While they were eating fried chicken and drinking beer, Tae-kyung had expressed curiosity about a virtual reality game capable of slowing down time. He questioned why such impressive technology was restricted to gaming and not applied to more practical fields. Jin Ho, unimpressed, opened another beer and dismissed the idea. He compared it to students who believed playing VR games could help them get into elite universities. According to him, VR did not truly slow time. It only created the illusion of it by increasing data flow to the brain. Once a player exited the game, most of that data vanished, leaving little lasting benefit. Jin Ho explained that VR systems stress the brain heavily. Although in-game time might stretch to 3 hours for every real-world hour, the limitations were substantial. Better systems existed, but they were too expensive for general use. Tae-kyung had listened carefully. He found it fascinating, even if the cost made it impractical. Jin Ho had grown tired of the topic and told him to get some rest. Back in the present, Tae-kyung sat quietly inside the moving carriage. The sound of hooves clattered against the road as he recalled that conversation. It felt distant now, he muttered to himself, trying to stay focused. He needed to wake up. Determined, he opened the skill menu. His profile appeared immediately. Jin Tae Kyung, level 11. The Jin family's cultivation techniques were listed but remained unavailable. Martial arts, spear techniques, and footwork had also been forgotten. The system showed 70 points in physical skills, 50 in passive ones, and 10 unused points. Due to his lack of practice, most skills were currently locked. Tae Kyung hesitated. Everything felt real. He tapped into the martial arts panel to read descriptions. The Jin family's primary technique was at the highest rank but could only be used by blood relatives. Materials would be needed for upgrades. The footwork technique shared the same limitations. The cultivation method, ranked at the exalted level, involved Tai Chi conditioning and allowed gradual accumulation of Kai. This caught his attention. The rank alone suggested power. Before he could study further, the system interrupted. A new tutorial mission had begun. He now had permission to circulate Kai, though he was not yet allowed to control it directly. The final test was active. The objective was to manage Kai flow without failure. Mission failure would result in death. Tae Kyung stared at the screen, horrified. He didn't recall agreeing to this. He tried to reject the quest, but there was no option to refuse. Both prompts simply said agree. The system forced the mission to begin. Tae Kyung screamed in frustration as the confirmation notice appeared. Regardless of his protest, the mission was underway. Tae Kyung fell to the ground in disbelief. His anger boiled over, but it changed nothing. The carriage around him began to twist and dissolve. A vortex opened, drawing him into its center. Tae Kyung covered his face and braced himself. Moments later, he found himself standing in an empty space. Confused, he looked around until a voice called to him. In the distance stood an elderly man with white hair and a gentle expression, dressed in white. Tae Kyung approached cautiously. The old man welcomed him and instructed him to sit. Despite his skepticism, Tae Kyung obeyed. The man spoke with calm authority, explaining that true martial masters did not need rigid postures to control Kai. He suddenly moved and struck several acupuncture points on Tae Kyung's body, rendering him immobile. Tae Kyung panicked, but the man reassured him. Concentration was essential. The old man placed a palm on Tae Kyung's back. He explained that proper Kai circulation refined the mind, body, and spirit. It allowed a martial artist to progress to higher realms. He began reciting verses from the Jin family's cultivation manual. As he spoke, Tae Kyung's body responded. Energy gathered at his forehead, and sweat dripped steadily. Yellow light emerged from Tae Kyung's bloodline, tracing paths through his veins. The system confirmed the mission was complete. Kai circulation had been established. Tae Kyung unlocked the ability to confront others' Kai and gained access to the Kai Gong skill. Poisonous energy was expelled from his body. He returned to the carriage, still deep in meditation. Moments later, the energy around him faded. He opened his eyes and exhaled deeply. His entire body felt revitalized. He placed a hand on his abdomen and whispered about the power of Kai. Above his head, a red orb shimmered, catching his attention. Outside the carriage, the driver announced that they were approaching the Jin family estate in Taiyuan. Chapter 6. Jin Tae Kyung sensed a subtle surge within him. Although his Kai remained modest, it was refined and steady. Another source of energy approached, resonating with his own. For a moment, he considered absorbing it to grow stronger, yet he decided against it. This temptation, while promising, felt reckless. He reminded himself to focus solely on the task at hand, believing it to be the wiser choice. Just as this thought settled, the driver's voice called out. They had arrived at the Jin family estate in Taiyuan. Tae Kyung acknowledged him and asked the driver to slow down. He wanted to test his newly acquired ability. With a curious expression, he activated his aura detection skill. A blue circle formed around him as the system displayed a message. Since his mastery was in its early stage, he could only detect individuals under level 30 within a 30-meter radius. The driver, closest to him, appeared as Wang Ha-wei, level 4. Tae Kyung grinned at the success of the technique. It had been a while since something worked as expected, and the simplicity of its usefulness lifted his spirits. He opened the mission menu while thinking bitterly about the game developer. The moment he returned to reality, he intended to give that person a piece of his mind. The carriage came to a halt at the estate gates. A man stepped forward, introducing himself as Hyuk Mu Jin, captain of the gatekeeping team. He requested their names and purpose. The driver tipped his hat politely and mentioned that they had come from Crimson Flower. Mu Jin raised an eyebrow. Recognizing the brothel's name, he approached the carriage with suspicion, questioning why someone from there would visit at such an hour. The driver cleared his throat and looked toward Tae Kyung, subtly indicating his identity. Mu Jin examined him for a moment and seemed to understand. Tae Kyung tried to close the door, but Mu Jin stopped him and demanded an explanation. Tae Kyung, confused by the hostility, asked what he meant. Mu Jin stared sharply, asking again if he truly didn't know who he was. Trying to diffuse the tension, Tae Kyung pointed out that he lived here. Mu Jin frowned and responded that he also lived here, but continued by clarifying that Tae Kyung was the third young master of the Jin family. Tae Kyung hesitated before stepping out. He felt uneasy as Mu Jin pulled out a pen and paper, beginning a formal interrogation. Mu Jin asked for his name. Tae Kyung reluctantly responded. The questioning continued: family affiliation, age, and martial arts level. Tae Kyung answered truthfully. Jin Tae Kyung, 20 years old, second-level warrior. Mu Jin doubted him, asking him to be honest. Tae Kyung tried to stay composed, feeling the entire exchange resembled an interrogation rather than a homecoming. When asked where he had been, Tae Kyung responded calmly. The mention of Crimson Flower drew immediate judgment. Mu Jin scoffed, assuming he had wasted money or stolen from the family's treasury. Tae Kyung frowned at the implication. Mu Jin walked closer, insulted him directly, and made it clear he viewed the third young master as a disgrace to the Jin name. Despite being a gatekeeper, Mu Jin offered unsolicited advice. He whispered into Tae Kyung's ear, urging him to stop dragging the family's honor through the mud and to start living like a decent human being. After delivering his words, Mu Jin waved for them to proceed and walked away. Tae Kyung stood silently, reflecting on those harsh words. He reminded himself that this was just a game, but something about the insult stung deeper than expected. Unable to contain his frustration, he called out to Mu Jin. As Mu Jin turned around, Tae Kyung advanced and raised his fist. A short while later, the estate's butler entered a study to report to the family head. The homeowner sat behind a stack of scrolls and asked him to speak. The butler hesitated before explaining the situation. His subordinate, known for loyalty and skill, had let his pride interfere with his judgment. He admitted that the man had gotten into a fight with the third young master. The homeowner asked for details about Tae Kyung's condition. The butler replied that the young master had been taken to the infirmary, injured and unconscious. Upon hearing this, the old man remained silent. The butler bowed low and accepted responsibility for what had happened, even offering to accept punishment. The homeowner asked to speak with the subordinate. The butler explained that the man was also in the infirmary with a broken bone. Upon hearing this, the family head waved off the idea of speaking with him. The butler departed, leaving the man alone in his study. A moment later, the man tossed aside his scrolls and called out for Wee Peng. Wee Peng responded immediately. The family head announced that they should step outside for a while. Wee Peng, unsure of what to say, simply sighed and followed. Chapter 7. Tae Kyung launched a full-force attack against Hyuk Mu Jin, yet his opponent dodged swiftly. The momentum caused Tae Kyung to stumble, leaving an opening. Mu Jin delivered an upward strike that hit Tae Kyung squarely in the face. While reeling from the blow, Tae Kyung scanned his opponent's stats and saw the level reading 20. Blood trickled from his mouth as Mu Jin struck again, muttering under his breath. Tae Kyung regretted provoking the fight, realizing too late that staying quiet and focusing on training might have been the better path. When the match ended, Tae Kyung awoke in bed. His body ached, his face bruised. The room was unfamiliar. A doctor nearby confirmed his awakening and informed him that he had been unconscious for an hour. Realizing he had collapsed for that long, Tae Kyung felt a surge of panic. Pain surged through his ribs, forcing him to curl up. The doctor advised rest and warned him against any sudden movements before leaving the room. Feeling drained, Tae Kyung opened his character profile. His stats appeared clearly. Jin Tae Kyung, level 11 warrior, second-class profession, reputation 10. Despite his noble birth, he was marked as a family disgrace. 10 available points blinked on the screen. Reflecting on his performance, he sighed, believing he might have stood a better chance had he distributed those points earlier. Determined to grow stronger, Tae Kyung flexed his arms and tried to move despite the pain. He knew that mastering martial arts was the only way forward. Before he could act further, a voice sounded outside the door. A middle-aged man entered the room and approached the bed. Tae Kyung immediately sensed a powerful presence. He activated his aura to assess the man's strength. Nothing registered. The absence of a reading meant only one thing: this man was beyond level 30. The imposing figure walked closer and addressed the doctor, asking about Tae Kyung's condition. The doctor explained that Tae Kyung had minor injuries and would recover soon. His demeanor changed abruptly when the man rolled up his sleeves, clearly agitated. Tae Kyung panicked. He recognized the energy and mannerisms. With certainty, he whispered one word to himself: "Father." However, the man was his eldest brother. The doctor was dismissed with a nod, despite Tae Kyung's desperate plea for him to stay. Once alone, he braced himself, realizing there would be no escape from the scolding that followed. The older man's tone turned harsh. He criticized Tae Kyung's behavior, listing off his failures: chasing women, gambling away money, and tarnishing the family's name. His words cut deep, not just from anger but from genuine concern. Despite his fury, he held Tae Kyung's hand gently and rubbed it, a rare gesture of affection. Tae Kyung, caught off guard, stared in confusion. The man, usually so distant, now appeared both worried and oddly affectionate. The man patted Tae Kyung's head and asked if he remembered anything. Tae Kyung, sensing an opportunity, chose to feign amnesia. Pretending to be disoriented, Tae Kyung replied that he remembered nothing. The older man, now fully convinced, shifted his tone again, more curious than scolding. He began asking questions, trying to confirm Tae Kyung's identity. Tae Kyung responded as best he could, playing along with the act. The man asked about his name. Tae Kyung replied: Jin Wee Kyung, successor of the Taiyuan family. Age: 35. Marital status: single. Parents: a father who traveled often and a mother who passed away 10 years earlier. When asked about his brother, he said Jin Mu Kyung, age 25, a disciple of Heaven's Gate Mountain, known as the Heavenly Jin Blade. Wee Kyung paused, suspicious. He pointed out that Tae Kyung had mentioned a nickname that had never been shared aloud. Tae Kyung responded with a fake cry of pain, clutching his head, pretending the memory strain was too much. Though skeptical, Wee Kyung appeared genuinely concerned. Tae Kyung assessed that his injuries, though painful, were not critical. Within 4 days, the swelling and bruises would fade. Once released from the infirmary, Tae Kyung quietly returned to his cottage. Chapter 8. As soon as Tae Kyung opened the door, he was greeted by a burst of colors. Various outfits and accessories cluttered the space, scattered across the floor in a chaotic display. Scratching his head, he stepped over shirts and garments with a puzzled expression. Every room he checked was the same, overflowing with clothes. When he reached the final room, he noticed something different. It was dark and silent. Upon entering, he found it filled with shelves of books rather than outfits. Excitement flickered in his eyes. He had found what he was looking for. Dust coated the shelves, but that didn't stop him. He pulled out one particular book, wiping off the grime to reveal its title, The Three-Legged War Technique. The system immediately prompted him to confirm if he wanted to learn the skill. Without hesitation, he agreed. The book described basic footwork techniques useful in real combat, common enough to be found in the marketplace. As he flipped through the pages, a question arose in his mind about the numbers listed. He tried to calculate mentally, combining the Jin family's cultivation style, spear techniques, and footwork. Realizing he could only learn a limited number of martial arts, he tossed the book aside with a frustrated grunt. He believed it was pointless to study low-tier skills when better options were available. With that thought, he reached for a red book resting higher on the shelf. This new book had no rank or limit and was described as a secret martial art once belonging to a demon king. The pages were filled with sensitive illustrations and ambiguous explanations. As he read, his confusion deepened. The techniques were unconventional, unlike anything he had seen. Meanwhile, in another part of the household, Wee Kyung had just finished his work. With a sigh of relief, he set his brush down. Wee Peng, who stood nearby, praised his dedication and handed him a fur coat. The air had grown colder. Wee Kyung thanked him, commenting that without such care, he might have fallen ill. Wee Peng responded with a quiet joke, calling himself a housewife. Wee Kyung smiled faintly, then spoke about how the elders often pressured him to marry. He sighed, acknowledging that eventually, he would have to do it for the family's sake. As they stepped outside, Wei Peng pointed out the unusually bright moon, suggesting they wouldn't need lanterns. Wei Qiang turned his attention to Tae Kyung's cottage. The lights were still on, which seemed odd for such a late hour. He decided to check on him. Wei Peng hesitated, warning that it might be better to visit later. He speculated that Tae Kyung was probably just drunk again, as usual. As they approached the cottage, faint sounds of heavy breathing echoed from inside. Wei Peng whispered his suspicions, claiming Tae Kyung had possibly brought a woman into the house. He offered to bet his entire month's salary on it. Wei Kyung leaned closer and urged him to be quiet. He insisted on seeing what was happening. Peering inside, they witnessed a completely different scene. Tae Kyung was drenched in sweat, holding a book in one hand while balancing on his toes. He was practicing footwork exactly as instructed in the text. His movements were awkward, and after a few steps, his leg twisted beneath him, sending him tumbling to the ground. In frustration, he cried out, wondering who had created such a bizarre technique. Wei Qiang watched the scene with keen interest, while Wei Peng mumbled in disbelief. Despite the mishap, Tae Kyung's determination was evident. A moment later, the system issued a stream of notifications. He had successfully learned the Jin Clan foot technique. The system also awarded him the title of new student upon completing the martial arts initiation. Exhausted, Tae Kyung gulped down a jug of water. He glanced at the scattered books around him and let out a weary sigh. Despite everything, the training was paying off. As he examined the collection, he discovered two more important texts, one on spear techniques and another detailing the Jin family's cultivation methods. Reviewing the materials, he reminded himself again of the limitations in how many techniques he could learn. Though tempted to keep exploring the collection, he decided it was better to focus only on what he could actually master. With that, he gathered the important books and walked away from the room. Hidden behind him, however, the risque red book remained tucked awkwardly into the waistband of his pants. Chapter 9. Tae Kyung sat in his room, quietly practicing his breathing exercises. As he exhaled slowly, a servant entered, carrying a tray of food. The servant greeted him politely and placed the meal on the table. Tae Kyung rubbed his head and muttered that he had trouble sleeping. Observing his own condition, he noted that with proper Qi circulation, his mind felt sharper and fatigue had lessened. The servant advised him to rest, warning that his injuries might worsen. Tae Kyung nodded, clutching his stomach and silently wishing for the wound to heal faster. When he responded, the servant commented on his formality, reminding him there was no need to speak with honorifics. Tae Kyung agreed, though he felt awkward. He still found it difficult to speak casually to elders, especially in such a realistic environment. Later, the servant went to report to Wei Qiang. Upon hearing the news, Wei Qiang lit up and declared that he would take the day off. He tossed aside the paperwork on his table with relief. However, Wei Peng swiftly gathered the scattered documents and firmly opposed the idea. He insisted that if word got out about Tae Kyung's condition, it would only complicate matters further. Wei Qiang defended his decision by pointing out that his younger brother was finally making an effort to learn martial arts. Wei Peng reminded him that the issue was deeper than that. The elders had long expressed concern, and he emphasized the severity of Tae Kyung's repeated offenses. Wei Qiang's demeanor changed. He slumped into his seat and muttered his frustrations about the family elders. Wei Peng then revealed that Tae Kyung had embezzled family funds 5 times. He had not even counted the other acts of mischief. According to Wei Peng, by family law, Tae Kyung should have been expelled. He explained that the only reason Tae Kyung remained in the household was Wei Qiang's protection. Wei Qiang glared at him, asking whether he held a personal grudge. Wei Peng denied it, stating only that he was deeply frustrated. He blamed the elders, who constantly handed Tae Kyung money, enabling further misconduct. Wei Qiang rose from his chair in anger, slammed his palm on the table, and cursed the elders' negligence. After a brief silence, Wei Qiang looked toward the window and asked Wei Peng to prepare an official order. The next morning, the household buzzed with new instructions. Wei Peng read the decree aloud. Due to violating 14 family rules, Jin Tae Kyung was to be confined in the training cave for an indefinite period. Upon hearing this, Tae Kyung's laughter turned shaky. His expression darkened as servants approached to escort him. He shouted in protest, demanding a practice room, not a prison, and objected to the mention of an indefinite stay. Wei Peng tried to calm him, but Tae Kyung continued to resist. When he finally collapsed to the floor, he cried out in frustration. He argued that he could train anywhere, even in the courtyard. Wei Peng called out his name sharply. Tae Kyung froze. A cold wave passed through him as he looked up. Wei Peng's intense gaze made him uneasy. He realized that something unusual had happened. A voice echoed in his mind. It was Wei Peng, communicating directly through telepathy. Tae Kyung panicked. He had thought such techniques belonged only to true martial masters. The voice warned him to listen carefully. Despite losing his memory, he was being closely watched, and harsher punishments could follow. The message continued. Wei Peng explained that the so-called indefinite punishment was simply a formality. In truth, Wei Kyung had intervened to help him. Although the notice stated an unlimited duration, Tae Kyung would only be there for 7 days, possibly even less if he showed progress. Still suspicious, Tae Kyung asked if it could be reduced to 3 days. Wei Peng replied that he was still lying. Tae Kyung studied his expression, noting the calm authority in his stance. He decided to test the man's strength by using his aura ability. Once the result appeared and he saw that Wei Peng's level was beyond 30, Tae Kyung's resistance faded. He reluctantly agreed to the confinement. Later that day, Tae Kyung arrived at the training cave. As he approached, he heard someone already inside. The moment he entered, he saw Wei Kyung waiting for him. Wei Kyung turned to face him as the footsteps echoed across the stone floor. Tae Kyung dropped to one knee, blinded by the light behind his older brother, who simply said that he had finally arrived. Chapter 10. Tae Kyung stood before Wei Kyung and greeted him. Wei Kyung returned the look and informed him solemnly that he could no longer protect him. As the successor of the family, he declared that Tae Kyung would be placed in solitary confinement. When asked for a response, Tae Kyung hesitated. He glanced at Wei Peng, gauging his expression, then lowered his head and accepted the punishment. Wei Kyung signaled for the guards to escort him. The cave door opened as Tae Kyung walked past. Through telepathy, Wei Kyung reassured him that everything necessary had been provided and wished him luck. Tae Kyung paused, surprised, then gave a faint smile as the door slammed shut behind him. That night, Wei Kyung paced in his room, clearly uneasy. He asked if Tae Kyung would be all right. Wei Peng answered with confidence, assuring him there was no need for concern. Still, Wei Kyung worried. He recalled how weak Tae Kyung had been in the past, especially during his younger years. Wei Peng dismissed the concern, reminding him that Tae Kyung had used countless rare medicines. He even joked about the incident involving a 100-year-old ginseng, which had left the chief physician furious. Wei Kyung cut him off, annoyed by the memory. The constant issues surrounding Tae Kyung, both within and outside the family, weighed heavily on him. He mentioned the secret meetings taking place and asked about the intentions of the Mount Heng sword sect. Wei Peng explained that scouts had already been sent, and he instructed them to prepare in Shaanxi province for any confrontation with the sect. Meanwhile, inside the training cave, Tae Kyung practiced diligently. The sound of flowing water echoed as he completed the final strike of a spear drill. The system notified him that he had completed 100 repetitions and successfully learned the Jin family's spear technique. His proficiency stat for the technique increased by 1 point. Tae Kyung sat on the ground, breathing heavily. He looked up at the ceiling and muttered his disbelief. Despite expecting a dark, damp prison, the cave turned out to be spacious and ideal for training. He even thought it might have been better if he had asked to be confined here earlier. A system alert informed him that he was tired and hungry. His stomach growled as he realized an hour had already passed. He recalled receiving supplies upon arrival and summoned the food medicine. A small pill appeared in his hand. Though it was made from herbs and food ingredients, it looked and smelled unpleasant. Still, knowing the benefits, he forced himself to swallow it. Immediately, his strength returned. His hunger disappeared, and his stamina fully recovered. The system confirmed that all stats would temporarily increase by 2 points. Overwhelmed with excitement, Tae Kyung opened his character profile. His progress was undeniable. Encouraged by the results, he summoned the rest of the food medicine and consumed them quickly. However, the system displayed a disappointing message. No further effects were granted. He had overeaten and soon vomited, unable to hold it all down. Despite the discomfort, he returned to training. The fire crackled nearby as he resumed practicing. The Jin family spear technique advanced to level 3, reaching 23% mastery. He repeated the drills again, raising the technique further to 25%. His effort was relentless, yet when he attempted 3 moves in succession, no points were gained. Frustrated, he questioned why progress was stalling. Determined, Tae Kyung slowed down. He readjusted his posture and began again with precision. He executed each movement carefully, starting with Dragon Stab, followed by Black Iron Swing, Spear Return, God Strike, and finally Cross Heaven. When the system displayed progress, he celebrated. However, he noticed it was not the spear technique that increased, but the Jin family's foot technique. He paused, confused at first. Then, after observing his footwork, he realized the connection. By integrating spear movements with proper foot technique, he had unintentionally trained both skills at once. A spark of understanding lit up his face. He repeated the method deliberately, blending the techniques. This created a powerful combination. At one point, he struck the wall with such force that it left a noticeable hole. He grinned, realizing the effectiveness of this new approach. Moments later, exhaustion overwhelmed him, and he collapsed. A final system message appeared. His energy was fully depleted. Yet, he had unlocked a significant achievement: mind and body becoming one. He had discovered how to synchronize martial arts techniques to elevate his realm. The mastery level of the Jin family's spear technique had officially reached level 3. Chapter 11. Jin Tae Kyung remained still inside the game console while Song Jin Ho awoke, yawning deeply. He sat upright for a long while, still groggy. After surveying the room, he realized he had fallen asleep in Tae Kyung's bed again. Tae Kyung was nowhere in sight, leaving Jin Ho puzzled. He wondered why Tae Kyung had not awakened him before disappearing. Driven by curiosity, Jin Ho stepped off the bed and walked over to the console. With a gentle nudge of his foot, he lifted the lid and found Tae Kyung inside, lying motionless. The sight of him sleeping so uncomfortably startled Jin Ho. He tapped him on the head, urging him to wake up. As the sun began to set, he removed his hat and tried again, suggesting they eat together. At that moment, Tae Kyung opened his eyes slightly, mumbling about soup. However, he soon realized it had only been a dream. Tae Kyung remained motionless for a moment, then opened his system panel. He was surprised to see his level had increased to 13, a jump of 2 levels. That explained the sudden boost in energy. 3 skill panels appeared before him: Level 1 Spear Technique, Level 3 Mastery, Level 1 Foot Technique, also at Level 3 Mastery, and a Cultivation Technique at Level 3, all restricted by his current bloodline. He received a ring labeled Peace of Mind, a high-grade item that stabilized emotions and improved concentration. Tae Kyung felt a wave of excitement and recognized the rewards of consistent effort. He distributed his available stat points, splitting them evenly between health and stamina, then picked up his spear and began practicing. Although enthusiastic, doubt crept in. He questioned whether his strength was enough to challenge certain opponents. The thought of facing someone like Hyuk Mu Jin made him shake his head. He knew the gap remained too wide. He forced himself to refocus, determined to keep improving. A notification from the system introduced a new training mode. This feature allowed him to summon illusions of past opponents. However, if the opponent's level exceeded his by more than 10, the simulation would be unavailable. He found 2 options displayed: Level 10 and Level 20 versions of Hyuk Mu Jin. Without hesitation, Tae Kyung selected the Level 20 version. An exact replica of Hyuk Mu Jin appeared before him. Tae Kyung walked around the figure, examining it closely. The likeness stunned him. Curiosity made him reach out, and his hand passed through the figure harmlessly. Relieved, he realized the simulation was non-lethal. The system prompted him to adjust the opponent's strength, so he chose to test Hyuk Mu Jin at 50%. The data finished loading, and Hyuk Mu Jin's replica opened his eyes with a cold expression. Tae Kyung accepted the challenge and launched into combat. He attacked swiftly, but his opponent dodged with ease. Tae Kyung kept pressing, driving forward with intense focus. Eventually, one strike landed, catching Hyuk Mu Jin in the face. The illusion collapsed to its knees. Tae Kyung found it almost too easy, leading him to question the realism of the simulation. He decided to increase the difficulty. Upon activating Hyuk Mu Jin's full power, the new version of the opponent appeared identical to the original. Their battle resumed, both figures clashing with equal resolve. As the two fought, the sky outside darkened, and the sound of approaching horses echoed from afar. Elsewhere, a bearded middle-aged man raised his hand, signaling a nearby rider to halt. A carriage accompanied the rider, inside of which sat a man dressed in red with a sword beside him. The middle-aged man asked about their origins. The man in red simply answered, Mount Heng. Back in the cave, the fire still burned. Tae Kyung struck again, and a large hole appeared in Hyuk Mu Jin's simulated body. The sudden success left him stunned. He questioned whether the victory meant anything, given his limited experience. Doubt returned. He had only recently begun practicing martial arts. How could he already surpass someone so skilled? Glancing at his hand and then at his spear, he began to suspect that the simulation might be tailored to his weapon choice. He decided to test a new idea. He activated the system to equip Hyuk Mu Jin's replica with the Jin family spear and foot techniques. The opponent now held the same skills and looked ready for a fair fight. Tae Kyung braced himself. This would be the real test, one where technique and timing mattered. The two locked eyes, and then, without hesitation, charged toward each other, ready for a true battle. Chapter 12. Hyuk Mu Jin lunged forward, thrusting his spear with fierce intent. Jin Tae Kyung, already drenched in sweat, focused intensely. As the weapon sliced through the air like a gust of wind, Mu Jin's eyes locked on him with murderous intensity. Tae Kyung reacted instantly, countering with a swift horizontal strike that cleaved the illusion in half. Mu Jin's figure faded away as the system issued a new notification. The Jin family spear technique had reached level 4. Tae Kyung's movements had become more refined, and his attacks now carried greater destructive force. With this breakthrough, he reached level 14. Excited, he opened his character profile. Displayed before him were his updated stats: level 14, Profession Warrior, level 2. Reputation 10, titles, Son of Noble Family, Disgrace of All Family, and New Student. His stats reflected the effects of each title. One provided bonuses, another penalties, and the last increased his training speed by 10%. Tae Kyung grinned with pride. In just 5 days, he had grown far stronger. Another level or two, and he could easily surpass opponents like the 1000 PB guy. Reaching level 30 within a week seemed entirely possible. His excitement, however, faded as his thoughts drifted to his mother and sister. Tears welled up as he whispered promises to return. Emotion overcame him, and he sobbed, calling out to them. Moments later, the door creaked open. Tae Kyung quickly wiped his face and turned to see Wee Peng entering with 2 subordinates. Wee Peng addressed him, stating that 5 days had passed. Tae Kyung, still confused, stepped forward and asked if they had come to release him. He reminded them that the original punishment was meant to last 7 days. Wee Peng confirmed that he was permitted to leave, but now needed to go elsewhere. Tae Kyung's expression shifted with surprise. Wee Peng explained that they were headed to the Great War of Politics, where the family's successor awaited along with the disciples of the Mount Heng sword sect. Hearing the name sparked a faint memory in Tae Kyung's mind, though he couldn't place it. A sense of dread filled him. Trying to delay, he asked for time to change his clothes. Wee Peng immediately refused. Tae Kyung then requested a shower, but Wee Peng placed a firm hand on his shoulder, preventing him from moving. Looking at him with piercing eyes, Wee Peng spoke sternly. He demanded an honest answer. Tae Kyung, sensing the tension, nodded cautiously. Wee Peng exhaled and then, in a sharp voice, asked if Tae Kyung had attempted to violate a young lady from the Mount Heng sword sect. The accusation struck him like lightning. Panic washed over him. What had the original Jin Tae Kyung done? Still reeling, he was escorted outside. Tae Kyung tried to defend himself, insisting he was innocent. Wee Peng responded coldly, asking if that meant his memory had returned. Tae Kyung denied it, fumbling through excuses. Wee Peng grew weary of his explanations and stated flatly that he no longer cared. His dismissal left Tae Kyung furious, though he kept silent. He briefly considered fleeing but stopped when Wee Peng reminded him that the old man still trusted him. That trust, he warned, must not be betrayed. Eventually, they arrived at the palace. Wee Peng opened the doors and formally announced the arrival of the third young master. As Tae Kyung stepped inside, every eye turned toward him. Wee Peng bowed respectfully to the elders, while Tae Kyung stood stiffly, awkward and nervous. The room fell into silence. No one smiled. The elders stared coldly, disapproval etched across their faces. Jin Wee Kyung sat solemnly above the others. Tae Kyung, now trembling, sensed how serious the situation had become. He forced himself forward, taking heavy steps. He reminded himself that survival depended on composure. Even in danger, he believed a way out could be found through focus. Still, a chill ran down his spine. The system issued a new warning. A bloodthirsty presence had been detected. Tae Kyung turned toward it and froze. From across the room, a man approached with a dark aura. Tae Kyung barely recognized him, but the figure spoke as though they had met. He greeted Tae Kyung, claiming it had been a long time. Tae Kyung's face turned pale. He stepped back instinctively and asked who the man was. The stranger responded with a smirk and scorn, accusing him of feigning ignorance. His name was Lee Seo-jun, a level 30 warrior. The intensity of his gaze and his hostile tone made it clear that he held a deep grudge. Tae Kyung began to sweat, fully aware of the danger he was now in. The atmosphere around him grew heavier, and he realized with dread that he might have inherited more than just the skills of the man whose body he now inhabited. Chapter 13. Everyone seated around the room turned their attention toward Jin Wee-kyung and Lee Seo-jun. Jin Wee-kyung appeared contemplative, while Jin Tae-kyung and Lee Seo-jun stared at each other in silence. After a moment, Lee Seo-jun finally broke the stillness, asking where Tae-kyung had been lately. Tae-kyung hesitated, scratching his head, and stammered something vague about crimson flowers. Lee Seo-jun narrowed his eyes and pressed further, wanting to know what had happened before that. Tae-kyung struggled to respond, shifting uncomfortably while his mind raced. He scratched his head again, mumbling incoherently, his frustration growing as he realized how cornered he was. Silently, he cursed Lee Seo-jun, blaming him for the mess. Gaining confidence from Tae-kyung's awkwardness, Lee Seo-jun spoke louder, accusing him of conveniently forgetting the truth. He declared that Tae-kyung had spent the night with one of the most expensive courtesans before heading to Crimson Flower, specifically at a mansion known as Radiant Moon. The crowd stirred upon hearing this. Someone slammed the table in frustration, while others buried their faces in shame. Tae-kyung, clearly overwhelmed, muttered something about the moonlight, trying to make sense of the accusations. Lee Seo-jun cut him off and demanded he stop making excuses. He then presented a stack of papers, claiming they contained written testimonies confirming Tae-kyung's actions at dawn. Tae-kyung stared at the documents, his face paling as sweat gathered on his forehead. His hands trembled as he accepted the papers. One document described a mishang of the Mount Hang sword sect being seen at dawn moon. Another, written by Lee Yulu, claimed to have seen Tae-kyung standing outside her room, followed by the sound of a woman screaming. Other pages listed similar testimonies from multiple sources. Inwardly, he panicked, realizing his original plan to apologize and seek forgiveness was now meaningless. He scanned the room, desperately trying to find support, waving the stack in front of the onlookers and pleading with them to take a closer look. Lee Seo-jun, anger boiling over, hurled the papers at Tae-kyung's face. The room tensed. Jin Wee-kyung's expression darkened as Tae-kyung stood in humiliation, his face flushed with fury. His clenched fists shook, and he glared at Lee Seo-jun. Tae-kyung shouted back, accusing Lee Seo-jun of discarding his own testimony like garbage. Voices rose, and the two began trading insults. The argument escalated rapidly, drawing everyone into the tension. Jin Wee-kyung could no longer remain silent. He struck the table and ordered the room to calm down. He turned to Lee Seo-jun and addressed him in a firm tone, criticizing his earlier actions as reckless and disgraceful. The weight of Wee-kyung's presence caused Lee Seo-jun to falter momentarily. Though he clenched his fists in anger, he stepped back slightly. Trying to reassert dominance, Lee Seo-jun reminded everyone that he had not come without backing. As the eldest son of the Mount Hang sword sect, he declared that he had been granted full authority by the patriarch himself. Jin Wee-kyung listened without expression and asked directly what Lee Seo-jun's real objective was. The question caught Lee Seo-jun off guard. After a brief pause, he laughed mockingly and replied that he wanted only one thing: a duel with the third young master. Tae-kyung, who had remained quiet, lowered his head in dismay. Jin Wee-kyung, unshaken, calmly poured tea and reiterated his question. He demanded clarity, asking once again what Lee Seo-jun's true purpose was. The inquiry briefly confused Lee Seo-jun before he laughed again and insisted that nothing else mattered. His response confirmed what many already suspected: war was now inevitable. A heavy silence fell across the hall. Tae-kyung stared at Lee Seo-jun, then glanced down at the scattered papers. Accusations and witness reports littered the floor. Remembering the contents, Tae Kyung grew more agitated. Every line seemed to seal his fate. Across the room, Lee Seo-jun tilted his head with a faint smirk, satisfied by his reaction. Tae Kyung decided to suck it up and duel with Lee Seo-jun. He broke the tension by calling Lee Seo-jun out, urging him to step forward so they can settle the dispute once and for all. Chapter 14. The sky remained bright as Jin Tae Kyung and Lee Seo-jun stood at the center of the stage. On one side were members of the Mount Hang sword sect, on the other, the Jin family. Whispers spread among the spectators, filled with disbelief and scorn. Some questioned Tae Kyung's mental state, while others doubted he could survive such a reckless challenge. Tae Kyung, though silent, felt the weight of every stare. His opponent stood 16 levels above him, radiating strength and bloodlust. Lee Seo-jun's grip on his sword tightened, his aura heavy with killing intent. Faced with this pressure, Tae Kyung's body trembled, sweat dripping down his forehead. His thoughts grew increasingly scattered, and the system notified him of a status ailment, cower. A voice suddenly reached him, calm and steady. Jin Wee Kyung offered words of reassurance, promising to intervene if anything went wrong. Hearing this, Tae Kyung took a deep breath and felt his nerves settle slightly. He clenched his spear and reminded himself to focus on defense rather than offense. Lee Seo-jun broke the silence, addressing Tae Kyung smugly. He questioned where his confidence came from, mocking his lack of martial arts experience. Tae Kyung, hesitant at first, considered his options. Refusing the duel would offer temporary safety but would spark conflict between the Jin family and the Mount Hang sword sect. Sooner or later, he would become a target either way. Choosing to fight seemed more strategic. If he endured the battle, the leveling system might present him another chance. Convinced of this path, Tae Kyung responded with calm determination, suggesting he felt capable of defeating someone like Seo-jun. His words drew laughter from his opponent, who accused him of arrogance. Tae Kyung, unfazed, asked his own question. He suggested that the current situation had been orchestrated by Seo-jun. The remark caused a shift. Seo-jun hesitated, then lashed out in denial. His anger mounted until he could no longer hold back. With a cry of rage, he lunged forward. Tae Kyung responded instantly, raising his spear to block the incoming strike. The impact forced him back, and he struggled to steady himself. Seo-jun continued his assault, striking repeatedly and demanding Tae Kyung beg for mercy. At one point, he promised to spare Tae Kyung's life in exchange for an arm. Despite the relentless attacks, Tae Kyung slowly began to read his opponent's movements. His mind cleared, and he started to recognize patterns. Confidence returned. When Seo-jun struck again, Tae Kyung held his spear horizontally, absorbing the blow without injury. His opponent's surprise was evident. Tae Kyung smiled faintly and countered. The spear landed squarely on Seo-jun's face, drawing blood and stunning the crowd. Jin Wee Kyung remained still, though his eyes revealed satisfaction. Tae Kyung whispered under his breath, proud of his success. Seo-jun wiped the blood from his mouth, humiliated. He pointed his sword once more, declaring Tae Kyung had only gotten lucky. Tae Kyung replied with a sinister grin and warned that the tide had turned. At the same time, the system confirmed the removal of the trembling status. Seo-jun, reflecting inwardly, acknowledged that he had never been a genius. He credited hard work for reaching the first rank at a young age, earning the hopes of the Mount Hang sword sect. With the Jin family's declining influence in Shaanxi province, he believed this match would allow his sect to gain even more power. However, reality had already shifted. Tae Kyung delivered a precise kick, sending Seo-jun flying. His sword clattered away as he crashed into the ground. Seo-jun, bruised and bleeding, struggled to rise and retrieve his weapon. He glared at Tae Kyung with fury and charged again. Tae Kyung lowered his head to avoid the incoming blade. In the same motion, he used his spear to strike Seo-jun's leg, then thrust the weapon into his midsection. Seo-jun collapsed, unable to respond. The Mount Hang sword sect members erupted in outrage. Their anger boiled over as they stood, swords drawn. They kicked over the tea table and roared in protest, demanding the match be declared void. Chapter 15. Wee Peng pinched his own face, startled by the pain. It wasn't a dream, the chaos before him was real. Across the stage, Jin Tae Kyung was dominating the heir of the Mount Hang sword sect, Lee Seo-jun. The young master, once mocked as a weakling, now stood tall against a warrior far above his rank. Wei Peng had seen him practice tirelessly, but this level of progress defied reason. Martial strength did not blossom overnight, yet there it was, unfolding before his eyes. From the other side of the stage, a metallic clang rang out. Members of the Mount Hang Sword sect began shouting, demanding that the match be called off. They insisted it had been invalidated, claiming foul play. Wei Peng watched them riot and cursed silently. They had no shame, their accusations were baseless, and their disruption, disgraceful. Some even yelled that there was no way someone like Xiao Jun could lose to a third-class warrior. Their pride blinded them to the truth. Suddenly, chaos erupted. One of the Hang sect members collapsed, bloodied. Gasps followed. Jin Wei Qiang had stepped forward and struck down the man. His expression was cold, murderous. Another protester shouted, only to be silenced with a violent slap. His teeth flew out as he crashed to the ground. The remaining Hang Sword sect members froze. Jin Wei Qiang's aura filled the space, silencing any further outburst. His voice thundered across the arena, ordering them to return to their seats and remain silent until the match concluded. After delivering his command, he calmly walked back to his seat. Wei Peng, visibly shaken, tried to object, but Jin Wei Qiang gestured for silence. Then, his eyes returned to the stage, now gleaming with excitement. This, he declared to himself, was the most satisfying moment of his life. The battle between Tae Qiang and Xiao Jun had stretched for hours. At this point, Xiao Jun's sword lay buried in the grass outside the ring. His body trembled, riddled with wounds. He clutched his arm and breathed heavily, disbelief etched across his face. Tae Qiang frowned and demanded he surrender. The fight was over. Xiao Jun refused. His pride flared as he cursed and prepared for another assault. He struck the ground, sending a shockwave through the arena, and charged once more. Tae Qiang responded swiftly. He swung his spear, its tip stopping just short of Xiao Jun's face. He hesitated. A killing blow was unnecessary. He diverted the weapon just in time. Xiao Jun, in a crazed state, released a burst of aura and continued his attack. Tae Qiang blocked it, though blood followed. Xiao Jun's left hand struck his face, but the damage was minimal. Tae Qiang leaned away at the last second, sparing himself from the full force. Blood dripped from his cheek. He clutched his face, his voice rising with fury. Despite unleashing his full Kai, Tae Qiang remained standing. The response came quickly. Tae Qiang drove his fist into Xiao Jun's face, then followed with a powerful strike to the chest. Blood spurted from Xiao Jun's mouth as he crumpled to the ground, kneeling and broken. Shock rippled through the audience. Jin Wei Qiang and Wei Peng exchanged stunned glances. Elders from the Jin family leaned forward, their eyes wide. The Mount Hang Sword sect members sat frozen. No one spoke. Xiao Jun remained motionless, kneeling in front of his opponent, drained of strength. System notifications flooded Tae Qiang's view. He had earned the victory title. His chest sense skill rose to mastery level 3, expanding his ability to detect enemies within 50 levels. His Jin family cultivation technique advanced to mastery level 4. His reputation increased significantly, and the system awarded him new levels and bonus rewards. The match had officially ended. Later, a painting was placed on a nearby table. It depicted Jin Tae Qiang standing triumphantly while members of the Mount Hang Sword sect bowed in defeat. Wei Peng looked at it in disbelief. Jin Wei Qiang, seated beside him, explained with pride that he had drawn the piece himself. He pointed to Tae Qiang's victorious stance beneath a limitless blue sky, a symbol of hope and revival. Wei Qiang praised his own artistic talent with great enthusiasm. Wei Peng, however, was unimpressed. He raised his voice, accusing Wei Qiang of wasting the entire day on a single drawing. Wei Qiang calmly pulled out a second painting and smiled. This one captured the moment after the battle. It showed Tae Qiang, still unsatisfied, begging to resume training. Around him, admirers looked on with awe. Wei Peng sighed, quietly admitting he too had been surprised by Tae Qiang's transformation. Wei Qiang pointed at him, beaming. He declared his amazement. No one had expected such a turnaround. His once timid younger brother had finally become a force to be reckoned with. Wei Qiang dramatically proclaimed that Tae Qiang's wings were now flapping, ready to soar. Suddenly, a messenger pigeon arrived. Both men turned to watch as it landed gracefully on Wei Qiang's hand. He opened the letter it carried, and his expression darkened. Trouble had come. Chapter 16. Jin Tae Qiang emerged from a small glowing dot. Gradually, his figure grew clearer, his arm swinging upward in a wide arc. A fierce scream followed as his fist surged forward. The image of a massive hand surged ahead. Suddenly, Lee Seo-jun jolted awake, his body covered in scratches. Though the vehicle moved steadily, his heart raced with fury. Bending forward, he trembled uncontrollably, teeth clenched. The shame of defeat overwhelmed him. Without warning, he slammed his fist into the carriage door, cursing bitterly. Outside, a man with a scarred face turned his gaze toward the sound. From within, Lee Seo-jun barked orders, demanding that the carriage keep moving. When he touched his forehead and felt a small needle, confusion filled his mind. Before he could react, a cold voice advised him to keep going. Something felt wrong. He turned, asking who the speaker was. A man in a black cloak stood silently. Only a pair of dark red eyes were visible beneath the hood. The figure coldly remarked that letting Seo-jun return to Mount Heng would change their plans. Suddenly, the poison took effect. A blue glow spread across Seo-jun's veins. Blood dripped from his mouth, and he began foaming, struggling to speak. The cloaked man removed the needle embedded in his head. Calmly, he suggested a detour to the cemetery at Northern Bounds before returning to Mount Heng. Seo-jun reached out, shaking violently, begging for help. Yet before a full minute passed, his hand froze midair. His body collapsed. His eyes turned white and lifeless. Silence fell over the carriage. A sinister chuckle echoed as the cloaked figure whispered a farewell to the fallen heir. Back at the Jin family estate, a fire flickered in a jar beside Tae-kyung. Shirtless and focused, he sat cross-legged beside his spear. A faint yellow glow radiated from his body. He quietly reviewed the recent fight in his mind. His thoughts remained sharp, and his breathing steady. The system activated, prompting a data table. He examined the stats, realizing he had focused heavily on specific attributes like strength, endurance, and sensitivity. He recalled the creatures he had fought: wooden dummies, statues, white skeletons. Each had contributed to his growth. Energy flared around him as he acknowledged his newfound strength. It was enough to defeat someone like Lee Seo-jun, a level 30 fighter. Smiling, Tae-kyung thought of how his opponent had trembled and attacked wildly. Despite Seo-jun's poison-based assault, he had endured it all. His kai burned brightly within his core. The contrast in their internal energy was now clear. Tae-kyung slowly exhaled, bringing his training to a close. Upon opening his eyes, the system issued 3 alerts. He frowned and checked them. The first one revealed his updated stats. Despite his recent victory, he remained a second-class warrior at level 17. His reputation score sat at 10. Disappointment crept in. He pointed accusingly at the system, questioning why defeating a first-class warrior had not resulted in promotion. While pondering, he touched his chin thoughtfully. Seo-jun had 20 years of training. This realization made him sweat. He now understood that increasing his kai level was crucial before he could log out. With frustration, he clicked his tongue. Despite circulating kai properly, nothing improved. He lay down with his hands behind his head, sighing deeply. Wondering if he needed metal pills or another type of boost, he recalled his brother Jin Wee-kyung's smug face. If he asked for a special pill, he expected rejection. Sitting up, Tae-kyung considered the internal pill. He realized it required careful control during absorption. Any mistake could be fatal. He approached his spear and picked it up, bracing himself for the next step. A week passed with no major events. However, Tae-kyung still had a headache over how to raise his reputation. The system dinged again. A notification revealed that rumors had started linking the Jin family to the sleeping dragon of Taiyuan. His reputation increased by 10 points. More believers meant greater influence. He raised his eyebrows at the phrase, sleeping dragon, and watched his reputation climb by another 3 points. A wide grin spread across his face. Outside, night had fallen. A crescent moon hung in a sky filled with stars. Within a meeting room, a stern voice echoed, questioning the purpose of a late-night summons. Several clan members expressed their annoyance, frustrated by the young clan head's unexplained decision. Some argued that the Jin family's leader lacked the maturity for proper management. Others believed it was time to let the elders take control. 8 individuals on both sides engaged in heated discussion. Suddenly, Jin Wee-kyung entered. The room fell silent, all eyes turned toward him as he took the central seat beside Wee-pung. After settling in, Jin Wee-kyung addressed the gathering, thanking them for coming at such a late hour. He explained that there was an important reason for the meeting. Before he could continue, a voice interrupted from outside, guessing the meeting was related to the Mount Heng sword sect. Jin Wei-kyung's eyes narrowed. His mind rejected the possibility. The mysterious figure stepped into the room, their footsteps firm and steady. Everyone stood up, stunned by the sight before them. No one had expected such a visitor. They respectfully bowed and addressed him as the eldest senior. The old man at the front stared coldly at Jin Wei-kyung, offering no greeting. Chapter 17. On one side of the hall, 4 men sat rigidly, pointing with arrogance, while the opposing group of 8 argued just as fiercely. None yielded ground. At the head of the chamber, the old man from earlier, seated at the same level as Jin Wei-kyung, watched the heated exchange with a cold gaze. Across the room, Jin Tae-kyung stood motionless, his expression unreadable, as the long-bearded elder silently assessed him. Tae-kyung's vacant eyes met the elder's, though they did not seem to recognize him. The elder, in contrast, examined Tae-kyung closely, his stare unsettling and probing. As the elder's gaze intensified, Tae-kyung began to sweat. He shifted his eyes, uncomfortable under the scrutiny. His heart pounded while he questioned the source of the man's killing intent. Something about that look filled him with dread. In that moment, Jin Wei-kyung's voice rang in his mind. The elder seated before them was the great elder of the Jin family, his grandfather. Tae-kyung stiffened. Jin Wei-kyung, calm as ever, reminded him to show proper respect. Tae-kyung nodded slowly, realizing that this man was the oldest in the family, perhaps someone he would meet even before his father. Wei-kyung leaned closer, his voice low. He told Tae-kyung not to panic, to answer everything truthfully. Tae-kyung nodded again, still unsure why everyone seemed tense. Receiving the response he wanted, Jin Wei-kyung straightened and addressed the room. He announced the beginning of the interrogation. Tae-kyung bowed with his hands clasped, standing respectfully in place. Jin Wei-kyung declared that, on behalf of the family, he would lead the questioning. His first question came quickly and clearly. He asked whether Tae-kyung had poisoned Lee Seo-jun of the Mount Heng sword sect. The accusation stunned Tae-kyung. His face flushed as confusion flooded his mind. Whispers rippled across the room. Many looked uncertain, while others seemed eager to confirm the accusation. A rotund man in the corner asked if Tae-kyung had any evidence to prove his innocence. Tae-kyung lowered his head, exhaling deeply. He did not understand why he was being treated like the only suspect. His tone turned bitter as he asked why no one else was under suspicion. The fat man trembled with anger. Voices rose again until the senior elder lifted his hand. He declared that he had several questions of his own and directed one to Jin Wei-kyung. He wanted to know how the conflict had started. Tae-kyung listened as the elder declared the problem had begun with him, the third young master. Eyes turned in his direction again. The elder said the family's name had been dragged through the mud and asked each person where the blame lay. One by one, they all arrived at the same conclusion. Tae-kyung was responsible. The bald elder stroked his beard and huffed, while Tae-kyung seethed silently. Around him, the 10 men seemed united against him. He looked at them in disbelief, feeling cornered. A man in a blue shirt attempted to defend Tae-kyung, pointing out that the fight had been fair. Another in gray dismissed the claim, insisting the fight must have been rigged with poison. He argued that they were not some lesser family from Sucheon, that honor mattered. Still, the gray-shirted man admitted he had inspected Lee Seo-jun's body. There had been no signs of poisoning. Despite this, the bearded elder suggested they stop the war by offering Tae-kyung to their enemies. This comment enraged Tae-kyung. His teeth clenched as the man continued, stating bluntly that handing over Tae-kyung might prevent their destruction. The room grew deathly quiet. No one moved. Then, a deadly aura surged from Jin Wei-kyung. His voice cut through the silence. He asked if they truly wanted to hand over his younger brother without proof. The man stammered, claiming he hadn't meant it that way. Wei-kyung's voice rose, veins showing on his forehead. He questioned whether that was the behavior expected of the family's head. Air burst from his hand in a sudden rush of kai, though he quickly calmed himself. Tae-kyung stared at him in shock, as did the great elder. Wei-kyung resumed speaking with renewed control. He explained that the fight had been fair, and the poisoning was the result of another's scheme. He demanded the truth be acknowledged. Some in the room remained quiet, others murmured among themselves. Wei-kyung pressed forward, asking if they truly intended to surrender to fear. He reminded them that Mount Heng had already drawn its sword. Their enemy would not hesitate. Now, their only choice was to fight back. If they wished to survive, they had to stand united. He looked at the bald elder, then declared that if the family preferred surrender, they might as well offer his brother's life to the enemy. His words cut deep, filled with contempt for cowardice. The great elder clapped once, drawing every eye. Even Wee Kyung turned toward him. The elder struck his cane on the floor and addressed the room. He admitted that he had once thought of Wee Kyung as just a boy, but today, he saw a capable deputy head of the household. He praised his actions and acknowledged the strength it took to stand firm during crisis. Placing a hand on Wee Kyung's shoulder, he said there was no need to apologize for past mistakes. What mattered now was character, pride, and resolve. He reminded the room that their strength must be enough to confront monsters if necessary. The elder's tone shifted, now serious and sharp. He questioned how anyone in the core family could even consider surrender. Tae Kyung watched, unable to make sense of how the old man was defending him. The bearded elder leapt from his seat in protest, but the great elder cut him off. He emphasized that unity was vital, especially now. He turned on the bearded man, asking why they hadn't offered his head if sacrifice was truly the answer. The man froze, his face turning pale. He backed away in silence. All eyes turned to him, sharing the same thought. No one understood why the old man had taken Tae Kyung's side so firmly. At that moment, Jin Wee Kyung cast a cold glance toward the deputy head of the household, his warning clear without a word. Chapter 18. Jin Wee Kyung turned toward the great elder and reminded everyone of the years of loyalty he had shown the family. Though his tone was cold, he allowed the matter to slide, calling it an unnecessary oversight. The great elder stroked his beard, raised his chin slightly, and remarked that perhaps the lesser leader was more forgiving than he had expected. Resting his hand on his cane, he added that it would be the responsibility of those involved to explain the incident further and ended his part in the discussion. Turning back to Jin Wee Kyung, the old man respectfully bowed and, on behalf of everyone present, expressed gratitude for his leadership. Immediately, the 8 members of the opposing side stepped forward, apologizing profusely. They admitted fault and begged forgiveness, flustered by the shift in momentum. Jin Tae Kyung, watching from the side, felt a heavy weight in his chest. The entire scene seemed hollow. Though his brother had saved the day, the crowd only praised the elder, barely acknowledging the true source of their reprieve. As the voices rose and fell, Tae Kyung grew more uneasy. The endless chatter, some thoughtful and some nervous, filled his head with dread. Something about this gathering gave him a bad feeling. The great elder took Jin Wee Kyung's hand and lifted it high, declaring that since the patriarch was absent, the lesser leader would take full responsibility for the coming battle. He encouraged everyone to unite and fight under Wee Kyung's command, convinced that with their strength, no enemy would overcome them. Motivated by his speech, 4 elders on the right raised their hands in agreement, vowing to follow his orders. The other 4 mirrored the gesture, aligning themselves with the family's defense. The great elder then released Wee Kyung's hand and thanked him. His gaze shifted to Jin Tae Kyung with a sudden coldness, leaving Tae Kyung briefly stunned. While the elder's words fueled the others' resolve, Tae Kyung still questioned whether this unity was genuine or part of a deeper scheme. Suddenly, a messenger entered the room with a letter. He handed it to Jin Wee Kyung, who quickly opened it. Blood-red text slowly appeared, bearing the words of a sworn enemy. It declared that both parties could not live under the same sky and promised relentless destruction. Jin Wee Kyung crushed the letter in his trembling hand. His voice was sharp as he declared the start of war preparation. Simultaneously, the system issued a new alert. The Mount Hang Sword Sect had officially declared war on the Jin Taiyuan family. Both sides had acknowledged the reality of the conflict. Another notification followed. The main mission for players had begun. According to the system, players could not avoid this confrontation. Only strength would decide who survived. The objective was clear: force Mount Hang to surrender or be destroyed. The rewards and risks remained unknown. Early the next morning, a man on a balcony received mail via pigeon. After retrieving the letter, he released the bird. Below, horses sprinted across training grounds as the system repeated its announcement: warriors of the Jin Taiyuan family must gather at the main mansion. The message emphasized that in the martial world, the strongest always survive. Victory would determine who remained standing. Tae Kyung stood before the system window with visible irritation. He stared blankly at the mission summary, too absorbed to notice his surroundings. A hand appeared, offering him a cup of water. Jin Wee Kyung patted his head and assured him that what happened was not his fault. Still, Tae Kyung muttered to himself, trying to make sense of it all. Wei Peng voiced his confusion about the enemy's true intentions. Tae Kyung privately recalled how leaders always mask their motives behind smiles. Their behavior reminded him of certain deceitful politicians. Curious, Tae Kyung asked about the enemy's background. Wei Kyung explained that the man had once reached the highest military rank in the land. His strategies were unmatched, and he was considered among the strongest in the martial world. He had many powerful subordinates and manipulated alliances from the shadows. Wei Kyung added that the man used power to influence even lords and had done so for generations. Wei Peng, hearing this, spoke with quiet fury. His voice trembled as he condemned such people as traitors. He confessed that he once hoped Jin Wei Kyung would follow their commands just to expose their motives. Wei Kyung, calm as ever, replied that doing so would have led directly to conflict. That, too, could have been part of their plan. He reminded them that, despite speculation, they could not know for sure what the man intended. However, one thing was clear. The man's influence was dangerous, and Tae Kyung must be cautious not to become his enemy. Wei Kyung emphasized that their priority must be solving the current crisis. Wei Peng noted that rumors about Lee Seo-jun's poisoning had already spread through Shaanxi. Their family's reputation had started to plummet. Tae Kyung was shocked by the speed of the rumor. Although surprised, he quickly realized the spread had to be intentional. The room fell silent, even the smallest sound echoed through the space. Wei Kyung asked if any of their allied factions had responded to their call for support. Wei Peng answered quietly that only one small state, referred to as the Lower District Sect, had replied. Elsewhere, a man wearing an official's robe held a pen and notebook, asking an approaching traveler for his name and reason for coming. The old man driving the carriage laughed nervously, trying to introduce himself. He claimed they had arrived from the Crimson Flower region. Inwardly, he found the place familiar, though he could not place why. A graceful foot stepped down from the carriage. The young woman introduced herself with a cryptic name. The old man blushed and stepped forward, warning her that war was approaching, and it was no time to cause trouble. As he neared her, however, he lost composure and stammered. The woman smiled confidently and declared her reason for coming: to collect a debt. Chapter 19. Inside a dimly lit room, Lee Seo-jun lay lifeless in a coffin, his eyes still open. A trembling hand hovered over his body but dared not make contact. The hand belonged to his father, the leader of the Mount Heng sword sect. Overwhelmed with grief, he gently closed his son's eyes and muttered his sorrow. Determined to avenge his son, he clenched his fist and turned away, declaring that those responsible would suffer 1,000-fold. Outside the palace, elite warriors stood at attention. Seo-jun's father stood before them, fury in his voice, and ordered everyone to prepare for battle. He vowed that this day would mark the beginning of their revenge. Elsewhere, Walwa appeared unexpectedly, greeting those present with a cheerful tone. Tae Kyung's expression shifted at the sight of her. Her sudden appearance caught him off guard, and he instinctively muttered her name. As she approached him, his discomfort grew. He stiffened and wondered why she had shown up now. Jin Wei Kyung intervened and lightly pressed his brother's head down. Tae Kyung, now nervous, tried to explain that he had nothing to do with her. He raised his hand in defense and insisted he did not even know who she was. Nervous sweat lined his face as he turned to Walwa and suggested she return home if she was lost. Walwa, unfazed, teased him instead and claimed she was there on business. He grabbed her arm, pleading for her to leave, but despite pulling her repeatedly, she did not budge. Her calm refusal made Tae Kyung even more frantic. Walwa simply laughed while Jin Wei Kyung, expressionless, ordered Tae Kyung to behave properly. Wei Peng observed silently, clearly unsure how to respond. Then Jin Wei Kyung revealed her identity. She was the head of the Shaanxi Province Lower District branch of the sect. Tae Kyung froze as the revelation sank in. His expression turned pale as he noticed a faint aura above Walwa's head indicating her level had reached 50. Sitting gracefully, she introduced herself formally. Jin Wei Kyung returned the greeting with appropriate courtesy. Wei Peng followed suit. Tae Kyung hesitated, barely able to mutter his own name. Walwa tilted her head and pretended not to hear, prompting everyone to glare at Tae Kyung until he gave a proper introduction. She smiled and responded with enthusiasm. Jin Wei Kyung then commented that he hadn't realized she knew his brother. Walwa quickly explained that Tae Kyung was a frequent visitor to Crimson Flower, which was part of their main network. Upon hearing this, both Jin Wei-kyung and Wei Peng directed sharp looks at Tae-kyung. Jin Wei-kyung teased him with a sarcastic remark about being a regular customer. Tae-kyung looked away in embarrassment. Walwa then placed her hands on the table and signaled that it was time to begin discussions. Jin Wei-kyung nodded and began by expressing gratitude to the lower district faction for their support. She acknowledged it with ease. He then asked why she had agreed to help. She pointed upward, saying their decisions were based on profits and losses. A mental image of a balanced scale flashed through her thoughts. After weighing the possible outcomes, her faction believed cooperation with the Jin family offered substantial benefits. Curious, Jin Wei-kyung inquired further. Walwa answered plainly. She wanted half of Mount Heng's stores and merchandise. Jin Wei-kyung, without hesitation, agreed to the terms. Wei Peng, surprised, addressed her as Master Wu, astonished by how quickly the negotiation had ended. She admitted she had not expected such swift approval. Jin Wei-kyung explained that the family prioritized its interests above all else. Hearing this, Walwa grew more serious and questioned whether the elders would accept the agreement. Jin Wei-kyung acknowledged the friction within the family but urged her to proceed without concern. Tae-kyung, standing quietly nearby, regretted his earlier remarks to her. Walwa then revealed a second reason for her cooperation. Blushing slightly, she admitted her personal fondness for Tae-kyung. The room fell silent. Jin Wei-kyung blinked in disbelief while Walwa continued, complimenting Tae-kyung's appearance and playful charm. Tae-kyung grew visibly uncomfortable and wondered whether she was mocking him. Despite the distractions, negotiations resumed. After nearly an hour, both sides reached a formal agreement. The lower district faction secured control over half of Mount Heng's goods and received exclusive rights to the red light district. In return, they promised not to share any information about the Jin Taiyuan family with outsiders. Once the agreement was signed and sealed, Walwa held up the contract with a smile and extended her hand. Jin Wei-kyung shook it, affirming their alliance. The system chimed, confirming that the alliance would remain active until the conflict concluded. Walwa politely announced her departure. Jin Wei-kyung thanked her once more. Tae-kyung had avoided her gaze the entire time, hoping she would simply walk past him. As she turned to leave, the room settled into silence. Just as she reached the door, she suddenly called out to Tae-kyung, asking him to escort her. He was stunned and hesitated. When he questioned her reasoning, she leaned close and whispered something into his ear. Jin Wei-kyung, curious, tilted his head to listen. Whatever she said caused both their faces to flush red. Jin Wei-kyung, now grinning, shouted joyfully, delighted by the interaction. Tae-kyung, still unsure how to react, sighed and agreed to see her off. Walwa beamed with satisfaction as her plan succeeded. Chapter 20. Under the night sky, flames from the torches crackled, casting an eerie glow across the battlefield. Jin Tae-kyung stood frozen, his teeth clenched around his lower lip as tears welled in his eyes. It was supposed to be just a game, yet the sight before him said otherwise. Blood covered the bodies of fallen students, one of them half draped in a white cloth, a shoe missing, limbs mangled. Their eyes remained open, mouths frozen in silent agony. Every detail etched itself into Tae-kyung's mind. He turned to Jin Wei-kyung, who gently covered a corpse's face with trembling hands. His voice, choked with guilt, blamed himself for dragging those untrained into war. From behind them, the elder approached slowly. His voice echoed through the field, calm but firm, stating this was the true face of war. He stroked his beard and reminded them that loss came to both victors and the defeated. Referring to the Mount Heng Sword Sect's leader, Li Qian-bek, he described him as one shaped by war, indifferent to casualties. Tae-kyung's anger burned as he listened. Wei-kyung glared at the elder, demanding respect for the dead. The elder responded coldly, calling the fallen nothing more than expendable soldiers. He named the regions most vulnerable to invasion, Shenyang, Yingxian, Shuozhou, and accused Wei-kyung of knowingly sending out ineffective messenger pigeons just to appease his conscience. Wei-kyung clenched his fists, struggling not to lash out. The elder's words struck deep. Though his delivery was harsh, his logic was sound. Wei-kyung bore the burden of leadership. As he stood among the crowd, Tae-kyung tried to remain inconspicuous. He glanced at his brother, realizing that in calm times, he might resent Wei-kyung, yet in moments of crisis, he became the only one to trust. His thoughts were interrupted when the elder addressed him directly. Tae-kyung bowed politely. The elder mentioned a rumor, one that called him the sleeping dragon of Shaanxi. Tae Kyung's expression darkened, unsure how to respond. The elder continued, crediting him with defeating the infamous bandit Jang Sam using the power of the Lord of Hell. Tae Kyung coughed nervously, trying to contain his surprise. The elder watched closely, commenting that such strength should be used on the front lines. Tae Kyung's balance faltered as fear surged through him. He pleaded internally for someone to intervene. Wee Kyung remained silent, offering no escape. His trembling hands gripped the wall for support until Wee Kyung finally agreed with the elder's suggestion. A system notification appeared, declaring the start of a new mission. The next morning, the skies were clear. Wee Kyung stood before the Jin clan army, reflecting on the elder's intention to send Tae Kyung into direct combat. However, after strong resistance, Tae Kyung had been reassigned. He was now the captain of the reconnaissance guard. The system informed him of his new mission: lead the unit, complete battle objectives, and accumulate 100 victories. He currently has none. While standing outside, Tae Kyung tried to reassure himself that reconnaissance duties might be less dangerous. Yet the memory of bloodied children haunted him. He surveyed his new unit. 5 members had been assigned under him. 3 of them watched him quietly. Tae Kyung suspected they might have been transferred from other departments. The 4th, Han Yopi, greeted him with enthusiasm, calling him the sleeping dragon of Shaanxi. Tae Kyung winced at the nickname, already irritated. The 5th soldier was Hyuk Mu Jin, who smirked while greeting him as 3rd young master. Tae Kyung clenched his spear, annoyed by Hyuk's presence. He introduced himself to the group formally and braced for what lay ahead. Meanwhile, from a distant observatory, Wee Kyung watched the reconnaissance team. Wee Peng approached, reminding him that they would depart by noon and likely arrive at their destination in 2 days. Wee Kyung acknowledged this, confident Tae Kyung could handle himself. Their conversation was interrupted by the sight of a bird in the sky. A pigeon descended toward them, carrying urgent news. The letter it delivered was from the lower district faction. It reported that Jo Pil, also known as One Strike, One Kill, had appeared in Jenggong with 40 soldiers. Wee Kyung read the letter carefully. He calculated the distance, 50 kilometers covered in a few days. An image of the area formed in his mind. If the soldiers passed Hongshui, Taiyuan would be the next likely target. The name Jo Pil stirred unease. Known for his brutality, his presence suggested danger for any Jin family members still stationed in that region. Realizing the urgency, Wee Kyung ordered Wee Peng to dispatch 50 soldiers immediately to Jenggong. Wee Peng hesitated slightly, sensing something deeper. His gaze shifted to Wee Kyung's anxious face. Wee Kyung's voice broke as he asked where Tae Kyung had been deployed. Wee Peng hesitated before answering. Tae Kyung had been sent to Jenggong. Chapter 21. On the main road, Jin Tae Kyung and his subordinates advanced steadily, their feet kicking up dust on either side. After marching for a long time, Tae Kyung finally raised his voice, calling them to regroup. As soon as they gathered, he issued another command to spread out. The 5 subordinates followed instantly. Without pause, Tae Kyung instructed them to line up. Their boots pounded the ground in unison, forming a long, disciplined column. Once again, he called for a formation. The group responded with practiced movements, heavy breaths mingling with their focus. Tae Kyung observed silently, rubbing his chin while thinking how far they had come. They were just F-rank hunters, clueless about mana, yet far more capable than typical NPCs. At least these ones could channel a basic form of inner energy. His thoughts were broken by a sharp voice. A shield clattered on the ground, followed by a shout of frustration. Mu Jin stood glaring, shouting that he could not tolerate this any longer. He accused Tae Kyung of treating war like a joke and wasting precious time. Tae Kyung sighed inwardly, frustrated at being forced to teach formations under such tension. The others whispered among themselves, some agreeing with Mu Jin. They reminded each other that they were soldiers of the royal army. Han Yopi scratched his head, suggesting that perhaps Tae Kyung had other intentions. He pointed out that learning battle formations might be part of a larger strategy. Mu Jin sneered at the idea. He pointed at Tae Kyung, loudly recounting his past. He reminded everyone of Tae Kyung's reputation for neglecting his training in chasing women. According to him, Tae Kyung had never taken responsibility seriously and was now unfit for leadership. His face glistened with sweat as he shouted, blaming Tae Kyung for triggering the conflict. Rather than responding with anger, Tae Kyung approached Mu Jin calmly. He leaned in and reminded him that his current behavior bordered on rebellion. Mu Jin paused, then quickly regained his temper, questioning what Tae Kyung planned to do about it. With a slight nod, Tae Kyung announced his intention to resolve the situation using his authority as captain. He would deliver 3 slaps as punishment. Before Mu Jin could react, the first blow landed, knocking him back a step. Stunned, Mu Jin clutched his cheek, trying to understand what had just happened. He attempted to protest, but a second slap cut him off. His face turned red, his eyes wide with disbelief. Furious, he readied himself to retaliate. Yet Tae Kyung moved first, dodging the attack and delivering a final slap. The third strike echoed sharply as Mu Jin collapsed at Tae Kyung's feet. The others stood silently, sweat beading on their foreheads. Tae Kyung brushed off his hands and declared the break over. They were to resume their march. As he looked up, something cold touched the tip of his nose. Snow had begun to fall. Far away, a sharp blade rose into the air. Snowflakes split as it fell, and blood sprayed across the ground. A man, his face drenched in blood, crumpled to the forest floor, his lifeless eyes wide open. Elsewhere, a group of muscular warriors surrounded terrified civilians. Among them, a child cried over his father's body, while a woman rushed forward and pleaded with the leader. She begged for mercy, urging him to spare the children. The leader, Jo Pil, replied with a twisted grin that he was no noble lord. His voice dripped with cruelty. The woman clutched the child, insisting that even in such a brutal world, children deserved to live. Jo Pil raised his sword and spoke with icy calmness, suggesting that children without their mother could never survive. Her defiance only seemed to amuse him. He waved the blade near her face, saying he would remember her final words. Screams filled the forest as blades cut through the air. After the massacre, Jo Pil's men mounted their horses. One of them, dressed in fur, joked that wild animals would feast tonight. Jo Pil laughed, correcting him. Their party would begin soon as well. If all went as planned, they could earn 1,000 gold coins for their actions. He then asked if any survivors remained. The fur-clad man reported that 3 people, a warrior and 2 children, had escaped through Zhenggong. He offered to deal with them personally. Jo Pil nodded and ordered him to handle it, trusting him to get the job done. Back in a small tent, Mu Jin sat in the corner, face swollen from earlier. The others sat nearby, silent. Still fuming, Mu Jin suddenly lunged at Tae Kyung, who remained unfazed. A moment later, a loud thud sounded as Mu Jin collapsed once more, unmoving. Tae Kyung crossed his arms, remarking that the worsening weather meant they would stay in the tent overnight. At least they had found shelter. Han Yopi approached politely, asking if they could speak. Alongside him, the others looked expectantly at Tae Kyung. Their eyes sparkled with eagerness. Tae Kyung rolled his eyes, then asked if they wanted more training. All 4 nodded instantly. Narrowing his eyes, he smiled before shouting for them to grab their weapons and step outside. As they opened the tent flap, snow swirled around them. Some shivered at the cold. Tae Kyung observed their determination, recalling how much they had struggled at first. Now, they begged for training. He realized that sometimes, action spoke louder than words. At that moment, a soldier called out, reporting a child spotted outside. Tae Kyung stepped forward to check. Sure enough, a small figure stood in the snow. He squinted and confirmed the sight. Confused, he asked if the child lived in the area. A sense of unease crept in. Suddenly, a system notification appeared before him. A new mission had begun. Chapter 22. Under the shade of a peach blossom tree, a man and woman sat close together, watching their 2 children play. The boy spotted a yellow flower near a rock, picked it, and placed it gently in his mother's hair. She smiled, patting his head, and softly spoke his name. Seo Cheon's grin faded as he heard her words. He glanced up, eyes full of confusion, unsure what she meant. His father stood behind them. The tree vanished, replaced by the shadows of unfamiliar figures. The man told his son to promise he would live. The boy stood by his sister, puzzled, and asked where they were going. Neither parent answered. Their forms faded into the distance as the children cried out, calling for them in desperation. Seo Cheon jolted awake inside a small cave, covered in sweat and wounds. His sister, Seo Yul, lay beside him, trembling from the cold. She asked softly when they would go home and see their mother. He whispered a gentle promise, telling her they were close. He then remembered his mother's final words. Despite the fear and exhaustion, he held on to them. Suddenly, a sound outside startled him. Knife in hand, Seo Cheon rushed out, shouting for the intruder to reveal themselves. He spotted an arm in the bushes, his grip tightening on the blade. A man appeared, signaling for silence. Recognizing him, Seo Cheon lowered the knife and called his name. Gong Ya Chung had arrived. Seo Yul ran into Gong's arms. He lifted her, explaining that they had to move quickly. Danger was close behind. Seo Cheon followed as Gong carried Seo Yul on his back, stating that their destination was Hang. He assured them their pursuers would not follow beyond that point. Behind them, fresh footprints in the snow marked their trail. From a hidden spot, an enemy scout emerged and signaled his group. Several figures moved swiftly in pursuit. Seo Cheon noticed the marks in the snow. Gong paused, realizing they had been found. They stopped, tense in the silence. Gong nodded grimly. A dozen enemies were near. He apologized for slowing them down. Seo Cheon dismissed the blame, insisting Gong had done his best. He drew his knife, stating he would fight if he had to. Without hesitation, Gong lowered Seo Yul and gripped his sword. He told the children to keep moving and promised to catch up. Turning to them briefly, he smiled, declaring his name with pride. Despite Seo Cheon's protests, Gong urged them to go. The enemies were approaching fast. As the enemy shouted from behind, Seo Cheon knew it might be the last time he would see Gong. Holding back tears, he carried Seo Yul on his back and hurried away, whispering an apology as snow began to fall heavily around them. Seo Cheon struggled through the snowy forest, gripping his sister tightly. Up ahead, he spotted a group camped in an abandoned tent. He recognized the letter stitched onto one of their uniforms, Jin. Among them was Jin Tae Kyung, preparing for training. Jo Yom caught a snowflake and muttered about the cold. Mu Jin noticed the children and asked quietly what they were supposed to do. Tae Kyung ordered them to act, saying they could leave the horse and proceed on foot. Jo Yom and Mu Jin exchanged whispers, suggesting they wait until morning. Tae Kyung, frustrated, shouted at them to get moving and wake Mu Jin. Startled, the group scrambled to their feet. Tae Kyung watched them, teeth clenched. His instincts warned him of approaching danger. The subordinates were tending to the exhausted Seo Cheon. Tae Kyung felt that familiar anxiety return. As he tried to calm himself, a system notification chimed. He muttered in irritation as the mission details unfolded before him. In the distance, the enemies had arrived. Their leader scanned the area and gave a loud order. Tae Kyung, unaware of the exact moment of danger, studied the new mission prompt. The task was clear: rescue the remaining survivors of the Shuozhou region and defeat the attackers. The mission required immediate action. As soon as the enemy leader spotted Tae Kyung's group, he called out mockingly. Tae Kyung responded without delay. He commanded his team to disperse and prepare for battle. Weapons were drawn. Seo Cheon clutched his sister and retreated behind the line. The enemy leader scoffed, amused at the size of the opposition. He ordered his men to kill everyone. Tae Kyung stood in the center, scanning the enemy formation. 10 foes against 5 inexperienced fighters. His own team lacked proper training, and Mu Jin was still recovering. It was a risky match. He considered retreating if necessary. Mu Jin turned nervously and asked what they should do. Tae Kyung had no time to respond before the enemies charged. His group readied their weapons, stepping back in alarm. Tae Kyung ordered them to switch to a defensive stance. Confused, they asked for clarification. He replied coldly, telling them to focus on defense. As he advanced, Tae Kyung activated Kai Judgment to gauge the enemy's strength. Most of them were under level 20. Suppressing a laugh, he realized the attackers were low level. Despite the chaos, he felt a flicker of confidence. The real battle was just beginning. Chapter 23. Jin Tae Kyung stood amidst the battlefield, his spear slicing through enemies with precision. Each strike left trails of blood in the air. One opponent, a man identified as Boon Dongo at level 13, collapsed to the ground, vomiting blood. Tae Kyung's subordinates looked on in shock, their eyes wide at the speed and brutality of the attack. Seo Cheon, shielding his sister's eyes, watched Tae Kyung closely, awe clear on his face. The enemy group quickly found themselves overwhelmed. None were left unscathed. The system notifications rang repeatedly in Tae Kyung's mind, each one confirming more points earned. Encouraged, he tightened his grip on the spear and prepared for another assault. Before the enemy could recover, he assumed an offensive stance and directed his weapon at their leader. His intent to win was clear. The enemy leader, enraged by the challenge, launched himself at Tae Kyung, blade swinging. The duel kicked up a storm of snow and dust. Those on Seo Cheon's side stood frozen, eyes locked on the clash. Moments later, the fight ended with a gaping wound in the leader's chest. As the dying man fell, he gasped out a warning: his elder brother would seek vengeance. Then, his body dropped at Tae Kyung's feet, lifeless. A golden light radiated from the fallen warrior, which Tae Kyung absorbed immediately. Satisfied, he patted his stomach, quietly content with the strength gained. Nearby, in a dark cave, Gong Ya-chung opened his eyes to find Seo Cheon and Seo Yul watching over him. Despite his injuries, he sat up slowly. The snow outside fell without pause. With a grateful expression, Gong expressed his appreciation. Tae Kyung simply waved it off, thinking only of completing the mission. Gong, still humbled, praised Tae Kyung's martial skill and humility. Tae Kyung gave a modest laugh, though his mind remained focused. When asked what had happened, Gong grew solemn. He recalled the events from 5 days earlier. The Shuozhou region had been under sudden attack, and their village had been surrounded. The Mountain Hang Sword sect had hired over 100 soldiers to massacre the inhabitants and torch their homes. Only through the bravery of the village chief and loyal warriors did some women and children escape through a hidden passage. After reaching the shelter, however, the survivors had been relentlessly hunted. Gong clenched his fists as he recounted the pursuit. Tae Kyung, alarmed, asked how many enemies remained. Gong estimated around 30, including a man named Jo Pil. Tae Kyung's eyes widened at the number. Without hesitation, he stood and declared they would stay and end it here. Gong looked at him in disbelief. Despite the odds, Seo Cheon agreed with Tae Kyung's stance, believing such cruelty should not go unpunished. Tae Kyung tapped Seo Cheon's head lightly, assuring him of his support, though in truth, his motivation lay more in farming experience points than justice. Once Gong mentioned Jo Pil, Tae Kyung's confidence began to waver. Jo Pil was known to have achieved peak-level martial arts, and no one had ever survived an encounter with him. This revelation made Tae Kyung panic. Reconsidering, he turned to Seo Cheon and suggested they return to the Jin family house instead. His sudden change in direction drew a sharp frown from Seo Cheon, who clearly disapproved. As Tae Kyung turned to leave, Gong called out, asking for his name and apologizing for not asking sooner. Tae Kyung hesitated. Revealing his real name might link him to the conflict's origin. He considered offering a fake name, but before he could speak, a voice shouted his real one. Mu Jin, still bitter from his earlier defeat, stormed toward Tae Kyung. Before he could make a move, Tae Kyung struck him with another slap, sending him reeling once again. Meanwhile, far from the camp, Jo Pil arrived at the scene where his loyal subordinate, Hyuk San-du, had been killed. He stared at the body in silence, then smiled. Clearly, someone skilled had been responsible. Rather than anger, the thought of encountering such a foe brought visible delight to his face. Chapter 24. White snow blanketed the forest as Wei Peng's group galloped through the trees. The horses' hooves struck the ground with rhythmic force, sending slush flying behind them. Without slowing, the riders pressed forward, their urgency carved into every movement. Wei Peng's thoughts remained fixed on Jo Pil. Whenever Jo Pil deemed someone worthy, he would always ask a question before delivering death. Remembering this, Wei Peng clenched his jaw. He could not allow the third young master to fall into that monster's hands. He gripped his reins tighter, urging his horse forward with renewed determination. Failure was not an option. Elsewhere, beneath the deep snow, a body lay motionless. A clean puncture wound marked the chest, evidence of a spear's precision. Jo Pil frowned as he examined the corpse. The nature of the wound suggested a skilled martial artist, possibly someone from the Jin family in Taiyuan, or perhaps a stranger of equal mastery. Either way, he welcomed the challenge. A hunt was far more enjoyable when the prey could bite back. He leaned closer to study the body of Hyuk San-du, then stood as one of his men approached. The subordinate, his face marked by a scar from forehead to chin, reported the sighting of a group of 7 or 8 people, one of whom was injured. They had left their shelter and headed toward the mountains. Jo Pil nodded, pleased. He instructed the man to keep watch. Suddenly, a cold voice interrupted him from behind. A group in purple robes emerged, questioning Jo Pil's actions and reminding him of Wei Kyung's orders. Jo Pil initially played along, then quickly dropped the pretense. He dismissed the speaker's authority, challenging the claim that he had exceeded his orders. The tension rose as the man insisted that his orders came from the sect leader himself and that Joe Pill's decisions could no longer be ignored. Joe Pill responded without words. In a swift motion, he gripped the man by the neck and snapped it. The body fell to the snow, lifeless. He turned to the others, declaring that this was precisely why he loved war. Fear surged among the group. Swords were drawn in response, but Joe Pill moved with terrifying speed. Blood splattered across the snow as he tore through the attackers barehanded. Those who survived were left scattered across the ground, their condition uncertain. With the confrontation over, Joe Pill stood straight and gave the order to continue the chase. His men followed closely behind, their boots sinking into the thick snow. Eventually, they arrived at a small cave entrance nestled within the forest. Jin Tae Kyung's group had already settled there for the night. The fire crackled at the center of the cave, offering some warmth against the cold. Tae Kyung sat beside Gong Ya Chung, observing the flicker of the flames. Across from them, Seo Cheon curled protectively around Seo Yul, both fast asleep. Tae Kyung noted that the cave, while not ideal, provided enough shelter to conceal their light. He glanced at Gong, curious. The man had not reacted much since the chaos. Tae Kyung wondered if Gong had realized he was partly responsible for the war. Perhaps the silence masked deeper thoughts. As this ran through his mind, Tae Kyung muttered a quiet curse at Mu Jin, blaming him for the discomfort they now faced. Gong finally broke the silence. He had heard rumors labeling Tae Kyung as a lazy and arrogant noble who knew nothing of martial arts. Yet after only 2 days of travel, Gong admitted he saw none of that. His voice carried a rare sincerity that left Tae Kyung momentarily speechless. Gong continued, questioning whether he should trust the same kind of rumors used to justify the war against the Shuajo survivors. Tae Kyung silently acknowledged that Gong had likely pieced together his true identity. The conversation faded again until Gong, his voice weak, addressed Tae Kyung. Coughing heavily, Gong asked a question he could not finish. Blood spilled from his mouth, alarming Tae Kyung, who rushed to his side. Gong, barely able to speak, revealed that the enemy's weapons had been coated in poison. He had kept quiet, believing the poison to be weak, but now it was too late to treat it. Panic struck Tae Kyung. He scoured his system inventory for a cure, searching through clothing, pills, and shields, but found nothing useful. Only weapons remained. As he looked on in frustration, Gong sat still, turning to watch Seo Cheon and Seo Yul as they slept peacefully. Then, Gong spoke once more, asking Tae Kyung to protect the children. His face glistened with sweat, pain evident from the poison's toll. Tae Kyung could only stare in silence, the request heavy on his conscience. At that moment, a system notification appeared before Tae Kyung. It announced a new mission, Gong Ya Chung's final request. The objective was simple: to safely escort Seo Cheon and Seo Yul home. The mission had no rank, no limit, and no reward. It was a promise, not a transaction. Chapter 25. Snow covered the trail as Jin Tae Kyung trudged ahead, silently convincing himself that his decision had been right. Gong Ya Chung, after all, was just an NPC programmed to deliver quests. Once poisoned and no longer part of the system's active missions, there was no reason to risk everything for him. Tae Kyung's forehead was drenched in sweat, not from exertion but from the mental weight of his thoughts. He kept telling himself the role of a player was simple: accept the quest, survive, and level up. There was no need to act like a martyr. Dying here would mean the end of the game, and for him, that was not an option. He glanced at the group walking nearby. Despite the cold, their faces were slick with sweat. A growing discomfort stirred in his chest. He reminded himself that he had real responsibilities outside this world. He could not die in a game no matter how real it felt. Then, the system's voice echoed in his mind, asking if he was truly going to leave Gong behind. He confirmed it without hesitation. Gong had made his choice. As Tae Kyung tried to slip away quietly, Mu Jin erupted in frustration, shouting in protest. Tae Kyung spun around, irritated, and warned him to stay quiet. Mu Jin, now cautious after a previous beating, lowered his voice and asked why they would leave someone behind. Tae Kyung replied flatly that Gong's condition was worsening, and he would only slow the group down. Han Yopi disagreed, speaking up firmly, insisting they couldn't abandon him. Tae Kyung folded his arms and asked sarcastically if they planned to carry Gong themselves. Han Yopi answered without hesitation, saying he would. The response made Tae Kyung sigh, clearly frustrated. He reminded them that carrying a full-grown man in winter would wear them out quickly, leaving everyone vulnerable. If the group slowed down, the mercenaries led by expert martial artists would catch up. None of them would stand a chance if exhausted. Seo Yul then lifted her head and asked if Tae Kyung was stronger than her father. Surprised, Tae Kyung asked her to repeat that. She replied that her brother said he was strong, but their father had been even stronger. Before she could finish, Tae Kyung burst into laughter, amused by her childish honesty. Seo Yul turned away, pouting, saying she wanted to see her father again, but he had left with their mother and never returned. Her innocent words struck Tae Kyung deeply. His mind wandered to memories of his own father, long gone in the real world, and of the family he still had, his mother and sister. He looked over at Seo Cheon, who continued walking behind him, visibly tired. Tae Kyung considered helping him, but the boy's stubbornness made him think twice. His own footsteps were becoming heavier. The thick snow made every step more difficult. He muttered to himself, annoyed at how this game kept dragging him into emotional turmoil. Just then, Seo Yul, resting on his back, widened her eyes in alarm. Before she could fall, Jo Yom scooped her up swiftly. A strong wind blew through the trees, unsettling the group. Seo Cheon noticed the sudden shift and asked where Tae Kyung was going. The others exchanged nervous glances. Mu Jin, his cheeks still swollen, stood frozen, trying to process the moment. They all noticed Han Yopi moving quickly along the path, his boots leaving deep tracks in the snow. Soon after, Han Yopi returned, carrying Gong on his back. The group stood in stunned silence. Tae Kyung stared, clearly displeased, and demanded an explanation. Han Yopi, panting heavily, addressed him directly. Tae Kyung let out an exasperated cry and muttered that none of this made sense. Although he was irritated, he extended his hand and told Han Yopi to pass Gong over. Han Yopi thanked him sincerely. Meanwhile, far from the snowy trail, the moon hung over a dark study. Inside, a man sat alone in silence. A cold voice questioned the current state of affairs. The man took a calm sip of tea before replying. Another figure entered the room, continuing the conversation. He spoke of Jo Pil, noting his erratic behavior, though it seemed inconsequential for now. The seated man listened quietly as the other continued. Mention of Jo Pil brought a subtle change in his expression. The visitor pointed out that the youngest master, now under government scrutiny, had unexpectedly become involved. This deviation from their plan might ultimately benefit them. The seated man raised his brows slightly. He reflected that if the Jin family's lesser leader were to witness his younger brother's death, it would drive him to madness. That chaos could plunge the Jin family Shangxi into bloodshed. The visitor then remembered a new player in the conflict. A sect from the lower district had shown signs of involvement. He clarified that their new branch leader had a strong presence, but reassured the seated man that it posed no threat. Once this business concluded, they would deal with him as well. The man in the chair nodded but warned that overconfidence could lead to mistakes. Before he could finish, two crimson eyes appeared behind him. The chilling presence offered a sharp reminder to choose his words more wisely. The seated man immediately apologized. Without another word, the shadowy figure vanished into the air, leaving a trail of smoke behind. Left alone, the man leaned back, exhaling slowly. He moved to the window, opened it, and stared at the moon above. Its cold light washed over his face. Within the silence, he thought to himself that his long wait was finally coming to an end. Soon, everything would belong to him. The man, now revealed to be the great elder of the Jin family, stood still in the moonlight, his ambition quietly burning. Chapter 26. At night, Jin Tae Kyung's group took shelter near a large cliff, using it as a temporary shield from the wind and snow. Gong Ya Chung lay motionless, drenched in sweat and visibly suffering. Tae Kyung sat beside him, studying his condition, then muttered they were nearly out of time and needed to leave quickly. Without wasting another moment, he stood and called for the group to prepare. Jo Yom responded energetically, shouting to the others to get up and move. Tae Kyung raised his brows at the sudden enthusiasm but ignored it. Reaching out, he called for Seo Yul. Before he could finish, Mu Jin stepped in swiftly, picked the girl up, and offered to carry her. He then marched ahead, commanding the group to move. Tae Kyung, now at the back, watched with irritation. Mu Jin's forced diligence rubbed him the wrong way. Shaking his head, he picked up his spear and glanced once more at Gong. He muttered a dismissive thought and turned his attention forward. A strange sound suddenly pierced the stillness, drawing everyone's attention. From within the trees came a series of unsettling rustles. Someone called Tae Kyung, who instantly raised a hand, signaling for silence. In the darkness, two glowing blue eyes emerged, accompanied by low growls. Sweat trickled down Tae Kyung's forehead as more eyes appeared behind the first, revealing a pack of wolves. One of the group members screamed in fear. Tae Kyung exhaled in relief, having expected something far worse. Straightening his back, he brandished his spear and shouted for everyone to prepare. He assured the group that even if a martial arts master had sent them, they would not have caught up so quickly. His senses had grown dull from lack of combat. Declaring that they could not allow harm to come to Seo Cheon or Seo Yul, Tae Kyung raised his weapon and signaled for battle. As the wolves charged, Tae Kyung readied himself. Yet, just before reaching them, the wolves suddenly veered off and fled. The group stood confused. Whispers spread as they questioned why the wolves had run. Tae Kyung remained still, struggling to understand. He considered whether he had unknowingly unlocked some intimidating power. Before he could explore the idea further, a system notification sounded. Tae Kyung expected a skill unlock but frowned at the actual message. A new quest appeared on the screen. One word, one strike, Joe Pill. The long chase had come to an end. The mission described facing one of the most violent men in Murm, Joe Pill. The task was mandatory and designated solely for him. His eyes widened as another alert confirmed he had no option but to accept the challenge. While trying to process this, Tae Kyung felt a strong gaze behind him. Turning cautiously, he saw a figure approaching with a sword in hand. Recognizing the man, he whispered the name Joe Pill. The others in the group froze in fear. Seo Cheon stood clenched in fury while Tae Kyung, visibly exhausted, raised his spear. Joe Pill came to a stop, eyes gleaming with a red aura that slowly crept toward Tae Kyung. The sight made him break into a cold sweat. It became clear, the wolves had not fled from him, but from Joe Pill. Joe Pill planted his foot in the snow and began to speak, claiming he only wanted a word. Tae Kyung warned him not to come any closer, interpreting the conversation as a distraction for an ambush. Joe Pill grinned, dismissing the suspicion, and gestured toward an unseen direction, stating that by the time anyone arrived, everything would be over. Tae Kyung scowled at the arrogance. Joe Pill then surprised him by proposing a deal. If Tae Kyung answered his questions, he would be allowed to go free. The offer sounded absurd, but Joe Pill reinforced it with an oath, even offering his life as a guarantee. Eventually, Tae Kyung agreed. They exchanged questions and answers. Once the final response was given, Joe Pill laughed, clearly amused. Tae Kyung watched with disgust. Joe Pill then mused aloud about Tae Kyung's reputation as the troublemaking third son of the Jin family, surprised that someone so young had reached such a high level without formal training. Tae Kyung snapped, insisting he had only spoken the truth. Joe Pill nodded, saying he appreciated their conversation. He added that if he had intended to kill Tae Kyung, it would have happened already. Now, he found himself intrigued. This unexpected statement left Tae Kyung confused. Joe Pill clarified that their meeting had sparked a new interest in him. He then held out a hand and suggested Tae Kyung would understand everything in time. Dismissing him with a warning, he added that he hoped they would meet again under more exciting circumstances. Tae Kyung, standing on snow-packed ground, thought about how unlikely it was that Joe Pill's eccentricity had just saved their lives. He signaled to his group, and they quickly moved to leave. Before they got far, Joe Pill called out again. Tae Kyung paused, listening as Joe Pill clarified in an even tone that only he was permitted to leave. No one else. Chapter 27. Joe Pill stood before Jin Tae Kyung and spoke coldly, suggesting he abandon the others and compensate him for 2 days of pursuit. Tae Kyung frowned, questioning the demand. Everyone who had been preparing to leave froze in place. Seo Cheon, carrying Seo Yul, glared at Joe Pill with hatred. Han Yopi, with Gong Chung on his back, remained tense and ready. The memory of his mother and sister flashed through Tae Kyung's mind. Joe Pill flicked his tongue, twirled his sword, and wore a twisted smile. He challenged Tae Kyung to deny him, expressing disappointment. Tae Kyung stood motionless, lost in thought, then turned and snapped that Joe Pill could stay disappointed. Rather than react with anger, Joe Pill laughed and replied that he would test him instead. Without warning, Joe Pill surged forward, his blade gleaming through the forest shadows. Tae Kyung swiftly raised his spear to block, but the force of the strike was overwhelming. He was sent flying back, landing near the group. Panic spread as his companions rushed to check on him. Tae Kyung clutched his spear tightly, teeth gritted, and muttered in frustration. He inspected the damage to his weapon and widened his eyes at the extent of the destruction. Jo Pil casually rested his sword on his shoulder, amused by how little resistance he had faced. Tae Kyung stood up again, frustrated. He thought that if he hadn't leveled up earlier, he would have been killed outright. Not even as a hunter had he faced a blow that powerful. Regret surged within him for choosing the wrong opponent. Jo Pil watched Tae Kyung closely, then asked if he was afraid. Trembling slightly, Tae Kyung tried to answer, but Jo Pil interrupted. He scoffed at Tae Kyung's weakness and declared he would help him grow stronger. Tae Kyung asked what he meant. Jo Pil answered that anger always overtakes fear. With those words, he released several waves of energy toward Tae Kyung. Tae Kyung spun his spear to block, but one wave slipped past and struck someone behind him. Blood sprayed through the air. Tae Kyung turned quickly, unable to recall the person's name, and called out to him. The wounded man clutched his neck, begged for help, and collapsed before finishing his sentence as another wave of energy hit him. Jo Pil raised an eyebrow and mocked Tae Kyung, saying he had intentionally targeted the weakest-looking member of the group. When Tae Kyung gave no response, Jo Pil pressed further, asking if he was listening. Tae Kyung ignored him, mentally scrambling for the fallen man's name. He questioned why it even mattered, since they were just non-playable characters in his eyes. Still, something inside him insisted he remember. He retrieved a seed pill from his inventory, swallowed it, and muttered at the discomfort. A system notification then rang out, informing him that all his stats would temporarily increase. Jo Pil observed and smirked, claiming his prediction had come true. Suddenly, Tae Kyung lunged forward with his spear. Jo Pil dodged expertly, weaving through the strikes. A sharp thrust nearly reached his head, but he parried it with his sword. Tae Kyung pulled back and shifted into a defensive stance. Jo Pil analyzed him silently, surprised by how advanced his skills were for someone in his early 20s. His intuition and instinct had clearly been honed by battle. As Tae Kyung pressed on with a second wave of attacks, his spear closed in again. Jo Pil, while deflecting, mentally noted that Tae Kyung's strength had already surpassed those like Sandu, who had no martial foundation. When Tae Kyung's spear rumbled forward, he stepped back into a kneeling stance, trying to steady himself. He questioned whether Jo Pil had lost all reason or simply descended into madness. The strength behind each strike grew heavier and more refined, yet Tae Kyung could not find a single opening. He panicked, wondering what to do next. His thoughts stopped as Jo Pil charged again. Tae Kyung yelled for him to stay back, then was thrown off his feet by another strike. As Jo Pil advanced, Tae Kyung insulted him in frustration, only for Mu Jin and Han Yopi to approach from behind. They signaled silently that they would provide cover. Tae Kyung suddenly remembered the effects of the victory title, which granted a 10% stat increase during one-on-one battles. He realized that if the others joined in, the effect would disappear. He bit back frustration, knowing he needed to make the most of the bonus while it lasted. Jo Pil was now within striking range. Tae Kyung raised his spear, attempting to create distance between them. He told himself they had to restrain Jo Pil's aggression before the title's benefits ended. At that moment, Jo Pil launched another assault, his sword slicing through the air. The sound of weapons colliding echoed through the clearing. Tae Kyung planted his spear and poured all his strength into the clash. His body trembled under the pressure. Behind him, Mu Jin and Han Yopi leapt into action. Their swords closed in, aiming for Jo Pil's exposed back. Chapter 28. Jo Pil suddenly paused, his eyes narrowing as if realizing something. He turned his head slowly, a red glow flickering in his eyes. With a sharp motion, he swept his hand outward and rushed forward, knocking Mu Jin and Han Yopi aside. His hands moved like hardened steel, breaking their swords with a single motion. The two warriors stumbled back, their faces filled with disbelief. They had not expected bare hands to overpower their weapons. Jo Pil remained furious. From one hand, a burst of energy erupted, while the other gripped his sword and swung toward Jin Tae Kyung. The strike marked the beginning of a more brutal assault. Tae Kyung attempted to defend by retreating slightly and muttering a phrase. His spear shot forward, aiming for Jo Pil's head. Sensing danger, Jo Pil grinned and shifted, his blade cutting across Tae Kyung's waist. Blood spurted as Mu Jin and Han Yopi were knocked to the ground. Tae Kyung fell to one knee, using the spear for balance. His arm pressed tightly against the gash in his waist. He turned his head slightly, staring at Jo Pil's back in horror, wondering how he had blocked that attack so easily. Despite the pain, he realized he had narrowly avoided a fatal blow by leaning just in time. His thoughts were interrupted when Jo Pil appeared directly in front of him. Without hesitation, Jo Pil raised his sword and began slashing across Tae Kyung's body, shoulders, waist, and knees. Blood flowed freely, staining the snow. Jo Pil then stepped back, mocking Tae Kyung's persistence. Tae Kyung, now covered in injuries, lowered his head and cursed under his breath. Jo Pil studied him for a moment, then calmly praised his endurance. Tae Kyung looked up, confused. In Jo Pil's palm, a red flame burst to life. He smirked and warned Tae Kyung that if he could endure this, he might deserve the compliment. Tae Kyung's eyes widened. The reflection of the flame danced in his pupils. Suddenly, the forest shook. Snow flew into the air, mixed with fresh blood. Tree trunks nearby were soaked in red. Tae Kyung now lay beneath a tree, his face dirtied, blood dripping from the corner of his mouth. The snow around him had turned crimson. His body was scorched, his clothing torn from the divine fire palm. He trembled, thinking he could no longer summon strength. Jo Pil reappeared nearby, tracking Tae Kyung's movement. Realizing the threat, Tae Kyung reached for his spear and used it to support himself, forcing his legs to stand again. Jo Pil, seeing this, frowned and noted that Tae Kyung could still rise despite being hit by his strongest technique. Flames flickered again in Jo Pil's hand, but he dismissed any possibility of Tae Kyung turning the tide. Tae Kyung ignored Jo Pil's taunts. He raised his spear, pointing it directly at Jo Pil's face. Jo Pil remained still, momentarily puzzled. Then he reached out and gripped the spear's tip tightly. With a sneer, he commented on Tae Kyung's persistence, claiming he had no chance in his current condition. His grip tightened. Tae Kyung's arms trembled under the pressure, yet he refused to let go. Realizing the risk, Tae Kyung tried to reason through his next move. He had managed to close the distance and saw a brief opening. If he gathered his remaining strength and struck Jo Pil's weak spot, the battle could still shift. However, before he could execute the plan, Jo Pil struck again. The blow was swift and unforgiving. Tae Kyung was sent sprawling, coughing blood. As he collapsed, Tae Kyung struggled to understand what had just happened. Jo Pil stood over him, laughing at his misery. He explained that trying to reincarnate sealed energy within the divine fire palm's effect was foolish. The energy would have nowhere to go, creating an internal backlash. According to Jo Pil, Tae Kyung should consider himself lucky to survive with only severe injuries. Jo Pil suddenly stopped talking. He bent down, lifting his hand again, prepared to strike with another fire-infused palm. He declared that it would be better for Tae Kyung to die now rather than suffer further. Tae Kyung lay still, his strength drained. He stared upward, wondering if his life would end like this. He reflected on the 7 years he had survived countless battles, only to fall within a few encounters here. As that thought formed, clarity returned to him. He reminded himself this was just a game. Jo Pil advanced, flame glowing in his palm. He smirked and prepared to say goodbye. Internally, Tae Kyung screamed for time to pause. Just as Jo Pil's palm neared, Mu Jin and Han Yopi arrived from afar. Their weapons raised, they shouted at Jo Pil to stay away from their leader. Hearing them, Jo Pil stopped his attack and looked back. A wicked smile formed on his lips. He stated that he had changed his mind and would now destroy the entire group. Tae Kyung, barely conscious, cursed Jo Pil in silence. Jo Pil, believing he had misheard, leaned closer and asked what he had said. Tae Kyung's lips moved slowly, barely producing sound. He whispered fragmented thoughts. Jo Pil grew irritated, demanding clarity. Tae Kyung clenched a fistful of snow and murmured one final phrase, "Fight as one." His voice strengthened. He lifted his head, now glowing with determination. A renewed energy pulsed through him. He spoke clearly, admitting that he had been fighting like a fool the entire time. As soon as the sentence ended, Tae Kyung reached down and retrieved a dagger hidden beneath the snow. Chapter 29. Jo Pil's expression shifted with a flicker of hesitation, but before he could react further, Jin Tae Kyung drove a dagger into his leg. The sudden strike caused Jo Pil to stumble and crash to the ground. Tae Kyung's body trembled from exhaustion, sweat drenched his face, and blood still leaked from his mouth. Despite this, his eyes remained cold as he glared at Jo Pil. Without pause, Tae Kyung launched another series of attacks. He repeatedly drove the dagger into Jo Pil's legs, causing blood to spray across the snow with every thrust. Jo Pil, overwhelmed by the pain, growled and reached out. He seized Tae Kyung's arm and cursed before wrenching the dagger away from him. After muttering a bitter comment, Jo Pil raised his palm and sent a powerful blast that hurled Tae Kyung into a nearby tree. The impact forced fresh blood from Tae Kyung's mouth as he collapsed. Jo Pil stood, gripping the bloodied dagger, furious and humiliated by the trick. He shouted in frustration, unable to believe he had been caught off guard. Tae Kyung, slumped under the tree, said nothing. However, the rage burning within him only grew stronger. As Jo Pil approached, his eyes darkened. His hand formed a familiar stance, preparing the sacred fire palm once again. With each step, his voice grew colder. He declared it was time for Tae Kyung to meet the end. Just as he was about to strike, Mu Jin and Han Yopi appeared, shouting Tae Kyung's name and rushing in to help. Despite their interruption, Jo Pil remained focused. He released the divine fire palm, directing it straight at Tae Kyung's chest. The blow struck him hard enough to shatter the tree behind him. Blood splattered onto the snow, yet Tae Kyung remained seated in place, overwhelmed by pain. Suddenly, Jo Pil's hands began to tremble. He stared at the growing pool of blood beneath his feet and staggered backward, mumbling in disbelief. Mu Jin and Han Yopi, watching from a distance, were stunned. They could barely comprehend what they were seeing. Jo Pil muttered that Tae Kyung had no weapon. Tae Kyung responded by revealing his plan. He had waited until Jo Pil's energy reached its peak, triggering a dangerous backflow of vital force. The effect, known as deflection, left Jo Pil vulnerable. Tae Kyung smirked and gestured toward the blade embedded in Jo Pil's stomach. The forest echoed with Jo Pil's enraged scream. He demanded to know how a mere boy could injure him this way. As blood poured from his mouth, he collapsed onto the snow, coughing and spitting. Tae Kyung, still under the tree, let out a long breath and hoped the fight was finally over. Jo Pil, refusing to accept defeat, began to stand once more. His aura darkened, and a black mist began to rise from his body. Through clenched teeth, he declared his title with pride, stating he was the 19th successor of the Divine Palm of Fire, known as One Word, One Strike Jo Pil. His body shook as he screamed into the sky, causing the ground beneath him to tremble. Tae Kyung watched the scene unfold in disbelief. He noticed Jo Pil's hair changing color, shifting from black to stark white. Alarm filled his mind as he realized Jo Pil was burning his own vitality. He wondered if Jo Pil was truly prepared to go this far just to kill him. Tae Kyung's energy was already depleted, and his broken arm made defending himself nearly impossible. At that moment, a system notification appeared before Tae Kyung. It stated that the mission had failed due to a significant energy difference. Understanding his options were limited, Tae Kyung resolved to burn his own life force as well. Blood spilled from his lips as golden light began to envelop his body. He floated above the snow, surrounded by power. Across from him, Jo Pil called out and charged forward with both hands raised, each glowing with fire. As he closed the distance, Jo Pil cursed and shouted for Tae Kyung to die. The world faded briefly into a different scene, a flashback from reality. In a training room, several hunters paused their practice as a loud crash echoed through the space. Debris littered the floor. The coach looked around, puzzled, and demanded to know who was responsible. A voice answered confidently, claiming responsibility. The coach, surprised, confirmed the speaker's identity. Jin Tae Kyung, a 20-year-old F-rank hunter, admitted it was him. The coach responded with a mix of disbelief and admiration, noting that the attack's force resembled that of a D-rank hunter. Tae Kyung, reaching for his bag, sighed and muttered about being ranked incorrectly. Before he could finish, the coach interrupted. He acknowledged Tae Kyung's remarkable skill but emphasized the harsh reality. His body and mana still matched that of an F-rank hunter. Using such a powerful skill drained him completely. Tae Kyung asked if he had another choice. The coach advised him to focus on building a solid foundation and not rely on that technique unless absolutely necessary. When asked for a name, Tae Kyung hesitated. Images from the forest returned to his mind. He clutched his spear tightly, shouting with everything he had. Across from him, Jo Pil unleashed his divine fire palm. The two warriors collided in one final, desperate clash, each pouring their last ounce of strength into the battle. Face to face, spear against flame, the outcome would determine everything. Chapter 30. The storm continued to rage across the snow-covered forest, its force growing stronger with each passing second. Wind and snow tore through the trees, shaking their roots and blasting the ground with dirt and ice. Mu Jin and Han Yopi took cover behind a boulder, watching the violent clash unfold with anxious eyes. Fresh blood splattered across the white snow. Jin Tae Kyung's right arm quivered, veins bulging beneath torn sleeves. He gripped his spear tightly, refusing to let go. The pressure of the battle had pushed both body and weapon to their limits. Soon, the spear's shaft cracked, then shattered, pieces scattering at his feet. Panic surged through Tae Kyung as he stared at the broken weapon. Across from him, Jo Pil remained kneeling, his face flushed with pain and exhaustion. He did not move. Tae Kyung kept his eyes fixed on his fallen opponent until a familiar chime echoed in his ears. The system notified him that the mission was complete and Jo Pil had been defeated. Relief swept through Tae Kyung, and his body collapsed onto the snow from sheer exhaustion. A moment later, footsteps approached from behind. Tae Kyung looked up just in time to see someone stepping past him. Seo Cheon moved toward Jo Pil without hesitation. In the next instant, Jo Pil's head rolled across the snow. Tae Kyung exhaled and shut his eyes. Seo Cheon stood trembling, his small knife still gripped tightly in hand. He tilted his head back and wept in a mixture of pain and relief. Elsewhere, inside a dimly lit cave, a group of raiders scoured the area for magic stones. One of them shouted in excitement after discovering a hidden cache. Dozens of magic stones gleamed in the walls. The group cheered and rushed to collect them. One man held up a stone and turned to his captain with pride, estimating its worth. Jin Tae Kyung followed behind, now back in modern clothing. He lifted his head, eyes welling up. The weight of his past struggles made this small victory feel monumental. He thought about Ha Yan and the possibility of finally moving to a safer district. Nearby, a girl called out to the vice captain, asking whether it was normal to find so many magic stones at once. Tae Kyung was lost in thought and did not respond. Instead, he silently calculated the potential profit: $200 for each stone, 500 more if he sold gear, plus a bonus. A man noticed his dazed expression and asked if this was his first raid. The girl nodded quickly. The man explained that it was rare to find more than 1 or 2 stones in an F-rank portal. This type of discovery was nearly unheard of. Before they could discuss it further, the captain turned to the group and asked how far they had progressed. Someone replied that they were near the end and might encounter a boss monster soon. The captain appeared uneasy. Tae Kyung, on the other hand, seemed eager. He raised his spear and suggested they press forward to defeat the monster. The captain paused to confirm whether all stones had been collected. A teammate replied affirmatively. Despite that, the captain stroked his chin, clearly hesitant. He voiced concern that something was off. So many magic stones, yet only low-level goblins had been encountered. The pattern didn't make sense. Tae Kyung dismissed the concern and spread his arms, confident. He declared the fight too good to pass up and claimed the rest of the team shared his sentiment. Several others nodded in agreement. The captain sighed, relenting under the pressure of the majority. He reminded everyone to prepare thoroughly. Once approval was granted, spirits rose. Tae Kyung and the others cheered, filled with excitement. However, their enthusiasm faded quickly. As they ventured deeper into the cave, their joy turned into horror. The air grew thick with dread. The battle began abruptly, and it was far beyond what they expected. Screams echoed through the cavern. Blood spilled across the ground. Bodies dropped around Tae Kyung as the giant monster appeared. Its eyes glowed blood red as it stared directly at him. Panic surged through his veins, yet he held his spear tightly, trying to steady himself. The captain had already been knocked aside, barely conscious in the corner. He called out weakly to Tae Kyung in warning. The monster heard the sound, lifted its foot, and stomped down. Tae Kyung watched helplessly as the captain was crushed beneath its massive foot. Blood erupted from his mouth, painting the ground red. With his last breath, the captain urged Tae Kyung to escape. Tears filled Tae Kyung's eyes as he cried out the captain's name. His entire body trembled. Around him, nothing remained but blood, broken weapons, and torn limbs. The cavern had become a graveyard. He suddenly woke up with a scream, springing upright in bed. Sweat soaked his body as the nightmare faded. Disoriented, he struggled to recognize his surroundings. A book closed softly nearby. Wei Peng stood at the bedside, concern etched on his face. He assured Tae Kyung that he was finally awake. Chapter 31. Mist covered the upper floors of the building. Inside, Jin Tae Kyung slowly sat up and asked how long he had been asleep. Wei Peng, standing nearby, informed him that he had been unconscious for 5 days. His injuries had been so severe that the doctors doubted he would survive another day. Tae Kyung listened in silence, tightening his ponytail with a wince. He asked if anything else had happened. Wei Peng nodded solemnly. A lot had occurred. He offered Tae Kyung the choice between good or bad news. Wrapped in layers of bandages, Tae Kyung chose the good news first. Wei Peng shared that all survivors from the Shuzhou region had returned safely. Among Tae Kyung's team, only 2 had been injured, and neither injury was life-threatening. Before Wei Peng could continue, Tae Kyung interrupted. The mention of survivors triggered a memory, although the name escaped him. He asked whether Zhou Pil's first victim had been found. Wei Peng confirmed that they had located the body and given it a proper burial. Since the individual was an orphan, there were no relatives to return his belongings to. Tae Kyung remained silent. Wei Peng, noticing the shift in mood, gently reminded him that a true warrior does not hide behind others but confronts danger head-on. He emphasized that the living must carry the memory of the fallen and ensure their sacrifices held meaning. Tae Kyung sat still on the bed, the memory of his fallen comrades and the harsh reality of war weighing heavily on him. After an unmeasurable silence, Tae Kyung let out a long breath. A faint smile broke across his face as he considered Wei Peng's words. Looking out the window at the cloudy sky, he softly wondered what dreams the fallen had carried. Surprisingly, Wei Peng answered. That warrior had once wished to become the greatest martial artist in the heavens. The response startled Tae Kyung. He chuckled, acknowledging how long the path would be. Wei Peng noted that Tae Kyung seemed to have returned to his old self. Embarrassed, Tae Kyung thanked him. Wei Peng's expression turned serious as he warned him not to let such a situation happen again. He then shared even more important news. 2 days earlier, a significant battle had taken place in Humshui Mountain. 100 elite warriors from powerful clans had clashed with 200 vanguard troops from the Sword Sect. Though Li Xiao Guang, the lesser leader of the sect, managed to escape, the battle had been a decisive victory. Only 30 enemy soldiers survived. More importantly, the feared demon twins of Mount Heng had been defeated. Tae Kyung asked if it had been Wei Peng's clan that achieved the feat. Wei Peng revealed it had been him and his lord who convinced the twins to switch sides. Sadly, due to the nature of war, they were still killed. Tae Kyung recalled his fight against Zhou Pil and compared it to Wei Peng's encounter. His opponent had been from the same sect, yet Wei Peng had spoken of it with such calm. Observing Wei Peng casually drinking water, Tae Kyung whispered to himself that this man was truly terrifying. Wei Peng finished his drink and humbly acknowledged the surprise he felt during Tae Kyung's battle. He admitted there were no words to describe the moment Zhou Pil's palm strike was blocked. Tae Kyung sheepishly responded, suggesting it was all luck, a result of catching Zhou Pil off guard. Wei Peng disagreed. He stated that tricks or excuses could not explain Tae Kyung's survival. A man like Zhou Pil did not earn his reputation through weakness. In the Murm world, only the strongest endured. Tae Kyung suddenly burst out, asking if this meant he was now stronger than Zhou Pil. Wei Peng frowned and replied that Zhou Pil was obviously stronger. Tae Kyung had only won through circumstance and clever maneuvering. He warned that true top-level martial artists were not to be underestimated. Tae Kyung sulked and muttered that he hated how Wei Peng always belittled him. Eventually, Wei Peng brought the conversation back to the Sword Sect's loss. Tae Kyung agreed that the defeat of their top fighters was serious. Wei Peng added that the damage extended beyond manpower. Tae Kyung asked what he meant. Before Wei Peng could answer, a voice called from outside. A man entered the room at a steady pace and declared that the Sword Sect had also lost the reason behind their war. No longer could they claim the Jin family relied on poison and cheap tricks. Wei Peng stood quickly and greeted the man with respect. It was Jin Wei Kyung. Tears filled Wei Kyung's eyes as he cried out dramatically. Seeing his brother alive, he ran forward and embraced Tae Kyung without warning. Tae Kyung recoiled in panic, shouting for him to stop. Wei Kyung clung to him tightly, smearing tears and snot across Tae Kyung's bandages. Desperate to escape, Tae Kyung yelled, his screams echoing throughout the estate. As night fell, tents of the sword sect covered the outskirts of Hanshui. Inside one, a painful blow landed. A man dropped to the floor. Li Qianbek, the commander, roared furiously at his son, Li Xiaoguang, blaming him for the failure. Xiaoguang bowed and accepted the punishment. Qianbek addressed the remaining soldiers. 200 warriors and the demon twins had been lost due to his son's overconfidence. He demanded replacements and gave a strict 4-day deadline to recover from the defeat. Chapter 32. Layers of blood-soaked bandages were peeled from Jin Tae Kyung's body. As the physician inspected the healing wounds, his eyes widened in disbelief. In over 10 years of working at the infirmary, he had never seen a recovery quite like this. Tae Kyung remained silent, opening his hand and quietly examining it. Despite leveling up, he realized his body had not fully healed. It would have been better if his recovery were slower. A full and rapid recovery could easily raise suspicion among others. The doctor, still stunned, pointed at the medicinal herbs and muttered that even the legendary 100-year-old ginseng couldn't explain such fast healing. Tae Kyung was puzzled. He had no memory of using anything like that. Sensing his confusion, the doctor lowered his voice and mentioned that almost a year ago, the entire medicine warehouse had been raided. Tae Kyung immediately recalled being the one responsible for that event. The doctor continued, the head physician had been furious because, even with money, acquiring a 100-year-old ginseng was nearly impossible. Yet Tae Kyung had used it as if it were an everyday tonic. According to the doctor, that rare elixir could boost internal energy by 2 decades. Hearing that, Tae Kyung froze. His mind returned to the snowy forest where he had nearly died. The realization hit him like a stone. Without knowing it, he had consumed something invaluable. Overcome with regret, Tae Kyung groaned, clutching his head and muttering to himself about how foolish he had been. The doctor, watching him twist and flail on the bed like a madman, stepped back nervously before announcing that Tae Kyung's recovery was nearly complete and then quietly exited the room. Once alone, Tae Kyung quickly opened his system interface. As he scrolled through the stats, his eyes began to glow with astonishment. He had gained 30 levels. His reputation and energy had also surged significantly. There was no doubt now, he had truly defeated Joe Pill. The realization filled him with pride. Not long ago, he was frightened by petty criminals. Now, he stood as someone far stronger than he ever imagined. He also discovered a new skill, One Strike. The technique was listed as an ultimate rank, restricted solely to him. It allowed him to channel stamina and internal energy into a single overwhelming attack. However, the more power he used, the more exhaustion he faced. He could adjust how much energy to expend depending on the situation. Tae Kyung found it curious that such a move was simply called a strike, even though it closely resembled a high-level martial technique. In the real world, his F-rank hunter body could only use it once without collapsing. Yet now, inside the body of a level 30 warrior, he could activate it multiple times. Leaving the infirmary, Tae Kyung walked along the main road, pondering whether his strength was due to the game mechanics or something deeper. As he thought, whispers caught his attention. He heard passers-by talking about him. They were impressed. Some said he had defeated Joe Pill in a single day, while others believed he had saved hundreds. A chubby man walked over and greeted him respectfully. Tae Kyung remembered what Jin Wee Kyung had said earlier. Rumors had spread quickly, making him out to be a hero who led an army to victory. Tae Kyung scratched his head in embarrassment. He hadn't expected the story to spread so fast. Despite his discomfort, he felt a strange sense of fulfillment. The fame, though awkward, wasn't entirely unpleasant. His reputation had soared. In truth, it was all thanks to Wee Kyung's efforts to prove the story real. Tae Kyung laughed inwardly, wanting to vanish into the forest, yet appreciating the admiration from those around him. Walking further, he suddenly paused. It was time to leave. His mission was still active. Reach first rank, level 30, achieve 500 reputation, and hunt for specific rewards. 2 objectives were already completed. With his rising reputation, he only needed to boost his rank. Unfortunately, he had used the ginseng and missed the chance to upgrade through energy manipulation. Now, he needed guidance. Deep in thought, he arrived at his home and stood outside, debating what to do. He finally decided that asking was the best option. Inside, Jin Wee Kyung welcomed him with a smile. Tae Kyung greeted him politely. Wei Qiang handed over a report, mentioning that the sword sect at Hang Mountain was preparing to recruit new soldiers. Tae Qiang asked if a confrontation was imminent. Wei Qiang didn't answer directly, instead stating that they needed to attack the enemy first. He revealed the plan would unfold in 2 days. The room fell quiet. Tae Qiang wondered if he would have been able to log out by then. After a short pause, Wei Qiang revealed that a major allied clan called the Five Gates of Shaanxi would support them during the upcoming battle. He tasked Tae Qiang with protecting the rear line. Immediately, a system prompt appeared before Tae Qiang. It was a new quest, Rear Guard Mission. The objective was to defend the rear guard. Success would increase his reputation by 10 points, failure would result in the opposite. Tae Qiang eagerly accepted. Wei Qiang praised his reliability and expressed gratitude. Tae Qiang hesitated, then admitted he had questions. He confessed he was still only at level 2 and didn't understand how to rank up. Wei Qiang interrupted, surprised, claiming Tae Qiang was already the highest level. Tae Qiang was confused. He repeated that the system still showed level 2. Wei Qiang insisted otherwise, stating that defeating high-ranking fighters already placed Tae Qiang at the top. Tae Qiang grumbled inwardly, frustrated that he couldn't just show the system to prove his status. Wei Qiang dipped a finger in his tea and wrote the word, believe, on the table. Tae Qiang read it carefully and asked if belief really mattered. Wei Qiang explained that martial arts began from faith. A stunned Tae Qiang began to reflect on his journey. He realized he had always accepted the system's numbers as truth. Yet, as Wei Qiang said, those numbers reflected perception more than reality. Tae Qiang had defeated elite warriors and survived impossible battles. It finally hit him, he was already first rank. As he accepted this truth, a thin mist formed around his body. The system chimed, a new message confirmed it. He had reached first place in the spiritual realm. His physical and internal attributes had significantly improved. With each chime, his reputation rose again. Chapter 33. Walking down the crowded street, Jin Tae Qiang waved back at those cheering his name. As he observed the warm reception, he reflected on how it felt like he had always been admired. Despite that, his reputation had stopped increasing. Everyone already knew who he was, so to maintain this image, he now had to act accordingly. While deep in thought, a man stepped forward and clasped his hands respectfully, introducing himself as Kwok Jun, the guardian of the third gate. Tae Qiang acknowledged him with a smile and continued walking. After a few steps, he paused, turned around, and asked if Jun was one of the 5 guarding gates of Shaanxi. Kwok Jun confirmed it with a nod. Grateful, Tae Qiang grabbed Jun's hand and thanked him for his support. Jun quickly dismissed the praise, insisting it was an honor for the third gate to serve the Jin family. Tae Qiang appreciated the recognition. He jokingly attempted to excuse himself, but Jun invited him for tea. Tae Qiang declined politely, pointing toward the hall and explaining he had other matters to attend to. Inside the medical shop, groans of pain filled the room. Han Yopi lay on a bed, exclaiming that he was near death. Mu Jin, lying beside him, teased that it was a miracle he had survived at all. They both recalled the power of Jo Pil's palm technique, still shaken by how monstrous it felt. Han Yopi, reflecting on his own weaknesses, admitted his long-standing denial of his limitations. After a moment of silence, he declared his intention to become stronger even than Jo Pil. Inspired by Han Yep's determination, Mu Jin clenched her fists and vowed to surpass him first. They exchanged confident looks, their resolve visibly growing. Moments later, their enthusiasm turned into a light-hearted argument about who would become stronger. They laughed and debated loudly, not noticing the door open slightly. Outside, Tae Qiang listened to their banter. He sighed, torn between amusement and embarrassment. Though he had planned to say goodbye before the upcoming war, he decided against interrupting them. Watching from the hallway, he thought that just seeing their faces again was enough. Suddenly, Seo Yul appeared and called out to him. In another ward, Tae Qiang visited Gong and Seo Cheon. Seo Yul pulled him aside, asking about his condition. Gong smiled, explaining he had fully recovered after extended treatment. He mentioned the impending war and hoped preparations were complete. Tae Qiang was momentarily stunned. He hadn't expected someone who had been in the infirmary to know about the operation. If Gong was aware, then likely everyone in the Jin family knew. This raised concerns about the potential for leaked information. Just then, a system notification appeared. Someone had heard a rumor about Tae Kyung, and his reputation increased by 1. He brushed off the update, assuming it was not critical. Gong called out to him again, thanking him for leaving behind certain items. Tae Kyung was confused, unsure what Gong meant. Before he could ask further, Seo Cheon brought over a yellow bag. Gong explained it contained Tae Kyung's belongings from when he had been unconscious. He advised opening it discreetly and avoiding attention. Back at home, Tae Kyung opened the bag and was shocked by what he found. Inside were 3 rare items. The first was a martial arts scroll categorized under Divine Palm of Fire, a transcendent level technique restricted to those with the sacred flame. It originated from the flame-burning clan and taught mastery over fire-based movements. The second was a burning flame pill, an ultimate rank item with no usage restrictions. It could boost one's energy by 30 years. However, failure to control its intense heat could lead to a violent death. The third was an anonymous sword, forged from steel tempered for 10,000 years and infused with blood. Its full potential remained hidden, waiting for a special condition to be activated. Staring at the 3 glowing objects, Tae Kyung muttered in frustration. He wondered why such powerful items weren't given to him at the beginning. Despite pretending to reject them, he glanced back at them, tempted. The possibilities intrigued him. If he learned the sacred flame technique and used the pill safely, could he summon fire like Joe Pill? His imagination wandered until he pictured himself engulfed in uncontrollable flames. Shaking his head, he reminded himself of the dangers. Staying safe was his top priority. Any misstep could mean death. Another system notification reported a rise in his reputation. Tae Kyung calculated silently, he was close to completing his objectives. All he had to do now was remain cautious. That night, in a secluded hall, a cold voice questioned the situation. The great elder of the Jin family responded confidently, stating his forces were fully prepared. The shadowy figure behind him warned against underestimating their opponent. The elder assured him there was no reason for concern. The figure in the black cloak chuckled and vanished into the forest. Left alone under the moonlight, the great elder gazed up and envisioned his future. Soon, the 2 dominant families of Shaanxi province would fall. He would lead a new era and become ruler of the region. By morning, war flags fluttered across every alley and street. The thunder of war drums echoed throughout the city. At the training ground, Tae Kyung grew anxious. He stared at his status screen. His objectives were listed clearly. Reach level 1, already completed. Reach a certain level, also complete, and gain 500 reputation. His current reputation stood at 475. The reward was the ability to log out. Gritting his teeth, Tae Kyung felt the weight of every decision. Another notification appeared, stating that the entire Jin family and Taiyuan had heard the rumors about him. His face twisted in discomfort. He cursed silently. Surrounded by a disciplined and formidable army, Tae Kyung stood motionless. The time had come. At this level, participation in the war was now inevitable. Chapter 34. The large training ground carried a heavy silence. A solemn atmosphere weighed down the air as Jin Wee Kyung stepped onto the platform. The elders stood in a line behind him, observing without a word. Soldiers filled the space before them, many with nervous glances and guilty expressions. Wee Kyung addressed them plainly, acknowledging that their enemies outnumbered them in soldiers and master-level martial artists. However, he likened the opposing force to a many-headed wolf, chaotic, composed of mercenaries, robbers, and men driven only by greed, lacking any sense of honor or unity. The great elder listened carefully, his brows furrowed in thought. Jin Tae Kyung, standing nearby, quietly cursed to himself, confused by what he perceived as nonsense from his brother. Still, Wee Kyung remained focused, ignoring everything around him. He warned the soldiers that the battle would be brutal and survival was not guaranteed, but insisted that victory would belong to those who risked everything and endured to the end. As soon as the speech ended, the soldiers stomped the ground in unison. Dust and sand lifted into the air as the march began. The mountain path proved difficult, though no one faltered. By nightfall, they stopped at the forest's edge to rest. Groups formed around small fires, laying out food and water. Jin Tae Kyung approached one of the fires and saw Mu Jin among the soldiers. Surprised, he frowned and questioned why Mu Jin had left the infirmary. Mu Jin, sitting upright with confidence, insisted he knew his body better than anyone else and refused to miss a battle bearing the family's name. Tae Kyung noted how tired Mu Jin looked and suggested he return to rest. Mu Jin immediately stood, rolled his shoulders, and declared he was in top form. Tae Kyung tested his claim by pointing at a group struggling to set up a tent, instructing him to help. Mu Jin opened his mouth to protest and tried to explain that his body still suffered from lingering damage caused by Jo Pil's earlier attack. Before he could finish, Tae Kyung shouted in frustration. Moments later, a voice interrupted them. Both looked up and were surprised to see Jin Wee Kyung approaching. Mu Jin quickly bowed and claimed he was feeling better. Tae Kyung also offered a respectful greeting. Wee Kyung dismissed Mu Jin's words and smiled, patting his shoulder before assuring him that he would recover fully. Mu Jin trembled as Wee Kyung walked away. Then, Wee Kyung turned to Tae Kyung and invited him for a walk. They soon found a quiet place under the cold moonlight. Wee Kyung asked how he was feeling. Tae Kyung replied that he was fine. Since leveling up and distributing his rank points, his body had felt stronger than ever. They walked on in silence for a moment before Wee Kyung informed him that he had been assigned to protect the rear and would only engage a few opponents. Hearing this, Tae Kyung saw an opportunity. Since his reputation had not yet reached the target needed to log out, he decided to make a request. He bowed and asked to be given a proper task. Wee Kyung was surprised by the request and asked if he was serious. Tae Kyung confirmed it, stating that he wanted to contribute meaningfully to the Jin family. Wee Kyung's eyes welled up. He asked if this had been on his brother's mind for a while. Tae Kyung confirmed again, asking to be entrusted with more. Overcome with emotion, Wee Kyung wiped his eyes and thanked him. Tae Kyung, puzzled by his reaction, kept quiet. His thoughts drifted back to his goal of logging out before the actual battle began. However, Wee Kyung then admitted he could not assign him any major task. This confused Tae Kyung, who asked why. Wee Kyung turned slowly and explained that he simply needed to focus on guarding the rear. Tae Kyung pressed on, suggesting even a reconnaissance mission. Wee Kyung placed a hand on his shoulder and looked him in the eye. He told his brother that survival itself was the mission. Even if the Jin family fell into ruin, Tae Kyung had to run and live. If the roots remained, new trees could grow. He added that both Tae Kyung and their second brother held the potential to accomplish more than he ever could. Wee Kyung patted his younger brother's head and left him with a parting message. This was his mission. Tae Kyung stood frozen, watching his brother disappear into the darkness. The next morning, as dew clung to the tree branches, the group packed up quickly and resumed their march. Tae Kyung walked silently, deep in thought. His brows were furrowed as he processed everything. Suddenly, a voice behind him announced their pace would allow them to reach Dingxing by the next day. Tae Kyung turned and saw a smiling face, unfamiliar yet strangely confident. He raised an eyebrow and asked who the man was. Chapter 35. The man introduced himself again as Kwok Jun, the guard of the third gate. Although they had met earlier in the city, Tae Kyung had no memory of the encounter. Kwok Jun reminded him they had even shaken hands. Tae Kyung scratched his head in mild embarrassment and admitted his poor memory. Kwok Jun waved it off casually, and they continued walking. As they moved forward, Kwok Jun confessed he felt disappointed being assigned to the rear guard. Tae Kyung, curious, asked why. Kwok Jun explained that such a position reduced the chances of glory or witnessing the skill of the famed Blade Flower. Hearing that name, Tae Kyung mentally repeated it, trying to place it. Kwok Jun continued to speak about the greatness of the Jin family's elder, who had earned widespread fame during the war between orthodox and unorthodox factions. He described him as a noble warrior, known for cutting down hundreds of martial masters during his youth. Tae Kyung recalled his last impression of the elder, a moment filled with unease. Now, hearing this praise, he reconsidered. Perhaps the man's presence in this war was a blessing. Kwok Jun, breathing heavily, whispered that even thinking about the upcoming battle made his heart race. Tae Kyung looked at him in disbelief. He wondered how someone could be so excited about war. When he asked whether Kwok Jun truly believed they would win, the man confidently nodded without hesitation. Tae Kyung paused, watching the unwavering confidence on Kwok Jun's face. Just then, Hu Mu Jin appeared and asked who the man was. Tae Kyung replied slowly, describing Kwok Jun as someone overly optimistic about everything. On the second night of their march, the army reached Hongshui. Jin Wee Kyung summoned the commanders for a strategic meeting. After analyzing the enemy's supply routes, he concluded that the opposing force would likely pass through the Eight Spring Gorge, a narrow path shaped like a bottleneck, ideal for an ambush. With assistance from the Wal Wa and the lower sect, archers were placed on the cliffs above. At dawn, 450 warriors, including Jin clan fighters and supporting faction members, began moving into position. After the meeting, Tae-kyung walked alone through the forest. He eventually reached a high cliff and sat there in silence. His thoughts returned to a farewell he had never properly given. Hours passed unnoticed until a group approached, their voices low as they searched for him. When they reached Tae-kyung, their shock was immediate. Mu Jin, leading them, gasped at Tae-kyung's haggard appearance and questioned whether he had slept at all. Tae-kyung said nothing. His eyes remained fixed on the system notification before him. The reputation bar showed 497 out of 500. He whispered softly that he was close to returning home. Hearing him mutter, Mu Jin grew uneasy, suggesting Tae-kyung had lost his mind. Suddenly, Mu Jin noticed a box near him. He asked about it, and Tae-kyung weakly turned his head before explaining. It contained a martial arts scroll and a spiritual pill. The scroll granted access to advanced techniques, while the pill could increase internal energy by 30 years. However, the side effect was death by fire if the user's body was unprepared. Tae-kyung asked if Mu Jin wanted to try it. Mu Jin recoiled at the idea and sarcastically replied that stuffing spiritual pills into one's face was ridiculous. He waved off the offer and walked away, dragging his companions with him. As he left, he teased Tae-kyung, calling him the sleeping dragon of the mountains. Watching them go, Tae-kyung muttered under his breath. Normally, he would have slapped Mu Jin for such remarks, but he felt too content to care. Becoming their leader had changed things. He thought back to where it all began, realizing everything had started after he woke up at the Red Flower brothel. Now, the war has begun. A strange noise pulled Tae-kyung from his thoughts. Mu Jin and his group halted, facing another small unit approaching from the opposite direction. Kwok Jun stood at the front, smirking. Behind him stood armed soldiers in unfamiliar clothing. Tae-kyung frowned, unable to recall seeing them before. Mu Jin stepped forward and reminded Kwok Jun that their orders were to remain with the third young master and protect the rear. Tae-kyung's heart skipped a beat. Something felt wrong. Kwok Jun stroked his chin and agreed that their missions seemed to conflict. Tae-kyung stepped forward, trying to push through the confusion. Kwok Jun offered no answers, only a chilling stare. Their eyes locked. Tae-kyung gripped his spear tightly. A moment later, Kwok Jun grinned and declared he had no choice but to reveal his true mission. His pupils turned black as he shouted for his men to kill everyone and gather the main forces. A loud roar followed as both groups prepared to clash. Tae-kyung's unit, outnumbered, took defensive positions. Kwok Jun remained still, an evil gleam in his eye. Tae-kyung's small group of 4 faced a force that vastly outnumbered them. Gritting his teeth, he cursed under his breath. Mu Jin, filled with fury, accused Kwok Jun of betrayal. Kwok Jun smirked and dismissed the accusation. He claimed he had never betrayed anyone and would not die at the hands of people like them. Mu Jin tried to charge but Tae-kyung held him back. Mu Jin protested, calling their opponents weaklings. Tae-kyung interrupted him, stating firmly that they were not. Using his ability, he discovered that Kwok Jun was level 40, while his soldiers were all level 30 or higher. Tae-kyung said nothing more. He simply muttered to himself, realizing they were all first-class warriors. A wave of unease passed over him as sweat formed on his face. He had spent 4 days with them and never noticed their strength. His focus on logging out had blinded him to the danger. Chapter 36. The system issued a new mission for Jin Tae-kyung: eliminate Kwok Jun's. Chaos erupted around him as enemies closed in, slashing and lunging. Tae-kyung clenched his teeth and blocked each blow. One of the attackers laughed cruelly, mocking his resistance. A flash of light then struck his side, forcing him back. Another enemy aimed for his flank, prompting Tae-kyung to lunge forward. A third opponent swung down from above, and he ducked just in time. Suddenly, an axe flew across the battlefield, lodging itself in an assassin's skull. Another attacker was pierced through the chest, blood spraying from the wound. A third collapsed after a blade sliced through his torso. The remaining man, brown-haired and panicked, stared in disbelief at the carnage. Weapons of all kinds, swords, spears, axes, surrounded Tae-kyung, who wielded them with practiced ease. Kwok Jun's gaze darted around, unable to grasp what was happening. Across the field, a group of Tae-kyung's allies advanced with shields and blades, dispatching their enemies with brutal efficiency. Kwok Jun watched helplessly as they overwhelmed his comrades. In the confusion, a thunderous explosion echoed nearby. His weapon shattered, his eyes filled with blood and fear as he realized their intel had been entirely wrong. Amidst the fallen enemies, Tae Kyung paused to wipe sweat from his brow. He silently praised his own technique, though a deep fear lingered beneath his calm exterior. This enemy had underestimated him, assuming he was nothing more than a pampered youth. In truth, Tae Kyung was a battle-hardened martial artist. Kwok Jun turned to flee, trembling. Before he could escape, Tae Kyung's voice rang out. He pointed his spear and ordered Kwok Jun to surrender. He promised a swift death in exchange for answers. Kwok Jun hesitated, then tried to flee again. Tae Kyung struck him with the spear, and he groaned in pain. When he still refused to talk, Tae Kyung raised his weapon again. Kwok Jun snarled that no words would stop him from running. Tae Kyung didn't flinch. Kwok Jun finally dropped to his knees, clutching his stomach, blood dribbling from his lips. He trembled as Tae Kyung stepped in front of him, staring coldly. Tae Kyung demanded to know who they were and where the real guardians of the third gate had gone. He accused them of being from the Hang Mountain Sword Sect. Kwok Jun remained silent. Suddenly, he bent down and spit a hidden weapon toward Tae Kyung, who quickly dodged it. Without hesitation, Tae Kyung retaliated with his fists. Punches and screams filled the air until the man finally gave in. He claimed they were the true guardians of the Third Canyon. Mu Jin approached and declared him a liar. According to him, the real guardians had been wiped out 30 years ago. Though not an official faction, they were known for raising orphans into skilled martial soldiers, people who would never commit such atrocities. Another warrior suggested the imposters had likely murdered the original guardians and assumed their identities. Hearing this, Kwok Jun laughed and revealed a sinister truth. The guardians of the third gate had always existed for one purpose: to serve a hidden master. This entire operation was part of a long-developing plan stretching back 30 years. Tae Kyung struggled to believe it, but the image of the Great Elder flashed through his mind. Only one man could have orchestrated such a plot for so long within Shaanxi province. He recalled how Jin Wei Kyung had once been accused of causing the deaths of their disciples, yet also remembered the role Wei Kyung played in uniting the Jin family before the war. Questions flooded his thoughts. Suddenly, he turned to Mu Jin and asked how many new recruits from allied factions were participating. Mu Jin replied that, combined with the Guardians and the Royal Guard, over 100 had joined. Tae Kyung pressed further, inquiring about warriors tied to the Elder's political faction. Mu Jin realized what Tae Kyung was suggesting, and his face went pale. More than half of their force was involved. The truth settled like a stone in their stomachs. The Elder had unified the family for this exact purpose. Tae Kyung saw clearly now. The war had been manipulated from within. He immediately gave orders to prepare for departure. As the soldiers rushed to move out, Kwok Jun whispered faintly. Blood seeped from his ears, and he muttered that it was already too late. Everyone turned to him. He raised his arms and screamed that the Jin family, Taiyuan, and the Hang Mountain Sword Sect would all fall. His plan, decades in the making, had begun. Blood burst from his mouth as he collapsed and died. The others stared in silence. Mu Jin commented grimly that Kwok Jun had killed himself. At that moment, the system notified Tae Kyung. All assassins had been eliminated. He had completed the challenge and leveled up. The final message appeared, confirming he had fulfilled all requirements to sign out. A wave of joy passed over him. Thoughts of his sister and mother filled his heart, and a rare, sincere smile formed on his face. He picked up his spear and silently apologized. He told them to wait just a little longer. However, another thought intruded. The image of Jin Wei Kyung returned. There were still things left unfinished. As he lingered, the system issued a countdown. In 3 seconds, it warned, he would be logged out. Tae Kyung shouted in protest. He wasn't ready. Chapter 37. The countdown began at 3. Jin Tae Kyung felt his surroundings blur. The system ticked down to 2. Mu Jin turned toward him, alarmed, noticing something was wrong. As the count reached 1, Tae Kyung could no longer keep his eyes open. Mu Jin and the others shouted for him, but their voices faded into a blinding light that engulfed Tae Kyung completely. Then, darkness. Within the void, Tae Kyung suddenly cried out. The brightness returned, searing into his vision. He tore the gem-linked headgear off his head, clutching it tightly. His hands trembled, he stuttered, trying to speak, but nothing came out clearly. Panic surged as he attempted to summon the system interface. There was no response, no character sheet, no task list, no inventory, not even a sound from the system. A click echoed faintly, and everything around him went black once more. 1 second later, he sprang to his feet, wide-eyed. Relief flooded him. He shouted, declaring he was finally back. Looking around, he took in the familiar sight of his room. It felt as though decades had passed since he was last there. On the bed lay Song Jin-ho, sound asleep. Tae Kyung stared at him blankly, recalling how they had both entered the game together. Frustration built quickly. The memory of what he had endured inside the gem resurfaced. His eyes burned with emotion as he approached Jin-ho and whispered that the hardships he faced were all caused by Jin-ho's snoring. In a burst of anger, he struck Jin-ho in the neck, muttering curses under his breath. Jin-ho jolted awake, groaning in pain. He asked if Tae Kyung had lost his mind. Tae Kyung, frowning, insisted he was serious. Jin-ho sat up, holding an ice pack to his bruise. He tried reasoning with him, saying only 3 hours had passed in reality. The old gem device they used was likely malfunctioning. Its outdated system may have distorted the flow of time. Tae Kyung listened in disbelief, unsure how his month-long experience could have translated into mere hours. Jin-ho exhaled slowly, attempting to ease the tension. He joked about Tae Kyung becoming a writer to explain such an absurd story. Tae Kyung, infuriated, grabbed the helmet and forced it onto Jin-ho's head. Jin-ho objected but couldn't react quickly enough. Tae Kyung dared him to try it himself. Jin-ho sighed, leaned back, and reluctantly agreed. Tae Kyung pressed a button on his phone and warned him to enjoy his time with the little flowers. Jin-ho scoffed, demanding him to close the lid already. With a click, the device sealed. Tae Kyung adjusted the timer for 10 minutes, muttering that it was more than enough. As the machine activated, silence filled the room. Tae Kyung stared at the device, counting seconds. By the 10th, he figured half a day had passed inside the game for Jin-ho. Smirking, he assumed Jin-ho would be bewildered and struggling to grasp the situation. Before another thought formed, Jin-ho suddenly opened the door and stepped back into the room. Tae Kyung gaped in disbelief, dropping his phone. He stammered, asking how Jin-ho could return so quickly. Jin-ho adjusted the machine, explaining that it had failed to stimulate anything properly. The plug had been loose the entire time. He grumbled about checking into a mental hospital and left to go back to sleep. Stunned, Tae Kyung collapsed to the floor, hugging himself as cold sweat spread across his body. His thoughts spiraled. He questioned everything. Was it a game, a dream, or had he truly gone insane? He stared blankly at the glowing ceiling light. His gaze shifted to the device, still cold and silent. The vivid memories of his time in the gem world replayed in his mind. Every moment felt real. Every emotion, every face, remained sharp and unmistakable. Then, something clicked. He remembered the instruction manual. Scrambling around the room, he searched for it, convinced it held the answers. After a frantic search, he pulled out a wrinkled booklet. He opened it quickly, flipping past the cover and the red ink table of contents. His hands froze as he turned the next page. His eyes widened in shock. What he saw there was something he hadn't noticed before. Chapter 38. Jin Tae Kyung sat on the bed, flipping through the instruction manual again. The words printed in bold caught his attention, binding on the player. His frown deepened as he read the clause stating it could only be used upon death. The implication disturbed him, but he kept reading. The booklet also emphasized that time inside the system passed slowly, though the player experienced it as real. That detail reminded him of his collapse inside the gem world and Mu Jin's desperate voice calling out to him. He began to wonder whether Mu Jin and the others had managed to warn Wei Kyung about the elder's betrayal. The image of his brother resurfaced. Questions stirred in Tae Kyung's mind. Would Wei Kyung be able to defend against the elder's treachery? He started calculating the time difference. Nearly a month had passed in the game, yet only 3 hours had elapsed in reality. That meant he still had some time to act. Relief washed over him briefly. He reassured himself that his allies were strong enough to handle the situation. There was no need to worry further. Returning to the last few lines of the manual, he compared it to a notification on his phone. It felt familiar, almost repetitive. However, a phrase stood out, synchronizing character and player. The meaning eluded him, and it lingered uncomfortably in his thoughts. Speaking to the system again, he tried accessing his personal information. No response came. Silence filled the room, broken only by muffled voices from below. The noise irritated him, yet he didn't react. Instead, he turned in for the night, weighed down by uncertainty. The next morning, Tae Kyung visited a virtual reality machine store to inspect the newest models. He tested several devices, including one with 70% authenticity, but none matched the immersive quality of the one he used. Although he appreciated the effort put into design, the non-playable characters still moved too stiffly, unlike the ones from Murim Login. After returning home, he found Song Jin-ho reading the instruction manual. Jin-ho dismissed it quickly, scoffing at the idea of launching a game on January 1, 2020. He insisted the machine was outdated. Tae Kyung pointed to the back of the manual, but Jin-ho casually waved it off. He hadn't even bothered to flip past the first page. Tae Kyung realized with a sigh that he might be the only one who could read the hidden text. That knowledge weighed on him. He left the room and sat alone in the park, scrolling through his contact list. Eventually, he hesitated, then tapped his sister's number. Her voice answered, distant and familiar. Tears welled up in his eyes. When she asked who it was, he struggled to respond but finally spoke, identifying himself. Her indifferent tone stung slightly. She teased him before returning to her studies, reminding him she was a high school student. Tae Kyung listened quietly, absorbing her words. His heart ached. Although only a day had passed in reality, it felt like he hadn't seen her in years. He realized how close he had come to never hearing her voice again. Determination returned. He had a family, he needed to protect them. Later, the two chatted casually. She complained about her exam scores and joked about pocket money. Their exchange was simple yet comforting. For a moment, everything felt normal. He reflected on his time inside the gem, likening it to a fading dream. Though the memories were vivid, they no longer anchored him. The following morning, Song Jin-ho stood on the rooftop with a cup of coffee. He stretched and winced, blaming his stiff shoulder on bad sleeping posture. Spotting Tae Kyung leaving with a backpack and a spear, he laughed quietly, remarking on his friend's strange habits. The discarded device lay nearby. Jin-ho figured Tae Kyung had finally given up on all the Murm nonsense. Yet even so, he admired his friend's persistence. Inside the guild waiting room, someone called out to Tae Kyung, surprised at how professional he looked. Another reminded him of their first encounter, back when Tae Kyung could barely speak from fear. Tae Kyung responded quietly, uncomfortable with the attention. The round-faced man, whom Tae Kyung had mentally labeled as Mr. Rough Guy, approached and asked why he was here. He assumed Tae Kyung still worked for a low-tier guild. Tae Kyung scratched his head and admitted he had been fired the day before. Mr. Rough Guy laughed loudly, teasing him about the guild name, Picnic, which sounded like a joke. Tae Kyung tried to explain, but the other man continued laughing. They continued chatting until an announcement interrupted them, calling for E-rank hunters to report to the main lobby. Mr. Rough Guy stood and prepared to leave. Tae Kyung looked confused, wondering when that man had advanced to E-rank. The announcement repeated, listing more E-rank names. As more people headed for the lobby, Tae Kyung grew anxious. He watched them pass, wondering why everyone else had ranked up so quickly. Another message rang out, this time calling for F-rank hunter Jin Tae Kyung. A spark of excitement lit his face. His name had finally been called. Standing in the main lobby with his backpack, he looked around, still trying to process everything. A man in a jacket approached and handed him a paper, introducing himself as a representative from the Peace Guild. Tae Kyung took the document, unsure of what would come next. Chapter 39. The vehicle arrived at the gathering place, where the man beside Jin Tae Kyung introduced him to the others. He proudly announced that this was the younger brother he always spoke about. Tae Kyung greeted them calmly. A man seated on the left raised his hand in acknowledgement, while another commented on Tae Kyung's appearance, noting how impressive he looked. The driver responded with a wish to support him. Mok Jun chuckled and explained that everyone here had been hunters for over a decade. Time had flown. Tae Kyung, despite his experience in the game world, felt slightly out of place among these veterans. He observed Mok Jun's round frame and thought the man looked more professional than expected. Still, their relaxed attitude reassured him, even if he remained unsure of what lay ahead. One of the older men leaned down and mentioned that Tae Kyung must be talented if he had been personally introduced. Confused, Tae Kyung responded uncertainly, unaware of what kind of introduction had been shared. The journey continued with laughter and conversation filling the car, Mokjun received a lighthearted punch from another companion, who joked about risking everything and insisted Tae Kyung be upfront instead of dodging questions. This made Tae Kyung recall the briefing at the airport, where the manager explained how E-rank hunters earned a base salary of 30, with an additional percentage taken by the Peace Association. It suddenly made sense to him why the pay seemed so generous. The manager had also mentioned that Tae Kyung would be the team's porter. Though not thrilled, Tae Kyung understood now why the position paid so well. It wasn't just about carrying bags. It was about survival. Mokjun suddenly turned serious, expressing gratitude to the group. Another man leaned back, coughed, and casually stated he only made a suggestion. The driver chimed in, pointing out that team leader Choi was the one who made the final decision. Tae Kyung responded with determination, saying he would do his best. Captain Choi broke the mood by instructing everyone to prepare. The car slowed along a red trail, and the portal gate emerged in front of them. It was one of many rifts left behind by the invasion of Demon King Amotus 30 years ago. Though dangerous, it had become a place where hunters could gather valuable materials, particularly magic stones. Inside the gate, ordinary tools quickly degraded unless imbued with magic. Thus, all hunter equipment had to be forged using enchanted materials, making gear both expensive and essential. Mokjun examined Tae Kyung's gear and asked how long he had used it. Tae Kyung admitted it had been with him for over 7 years. The group gasped. Mokjun chuckled while fastening his armor, teasing him for being too frugal. Tae Kyung could only shrug, admitting he had no better option. Mokjun reminded him that his own role didn't involve combat, so he would be fine. Tae Kyung, thinking of Jin Wee Kyung, nodded and said he understood. Captain Choi appeared in his full gear and asked if everyone was ready. The armor he wore caught Tae Kyung's eye immediately. It was the legendary Red Dragon battle set. Tae Kyung exclaimed in surprise, unintentionally drawing everyone's gaze. Realizing his reaction had shifted the mood, he quickly apologized and explained that he had only seen it in catalogs. Captain Choi accepted the apology and began explaining the armor's details. It was crafted from 5 types of magic and classified as B rank. Tae Kyung stood stiffly as Captain Choi emphasized the complexity and cost behind it. Though the armor was mostly aesthetic and flashy, the captain liked it for its look, despite its limited functionality. As the teleportation gate opened, Captain Choi led the team inside. Tae Kyung, still nervous, leaned toward Mokjun and asked if something was wrong with the team leader. Mokjun replied with a grin, stating that Choi had an unhealthy obsession with equipment and likely slept with his gear. Tae Kyung, disturbed by the idea, stayed silent. While walking, Tae Kyung noticed that only 2 others were with him. He asked about the rest of the Peace Association members. Mokjun casually revealed that the group only had 3 members, including the captain. Tae Kyung froze in disbelief. He questioned the plan, only 3 people entering an E-rank gate? Mokjun tried to reassure him, pointing out that one of them was a C-rank hunter. Captain Choi, who was preparing the mission list, held that rank. Tae Kyung fell silent. A single C-rank hunter was equivalent to 10 E-rank hunters. Realization dawned too late. One by one, the group entered the portal. Tae Kyung, the last to step through, found himself in a dark cave. A glowing orb lit the area, revealing moss-covered walls and thick shadows. Everyone else moved with practiced ease, while Tae Kyung looked around, slightly overwhelmed. Deeper inside, clicking sounds echoed along the walls. Monsters stirred from their hiding spots, alerted by the sudden brightness. They snarled and prepared to lunge. Tae Kyung froze at the sight, teeth bared and limbs tense. Captain Choi observed the surroundings calmly, then gave a sharp command for everyone to move into position. Chapter 40. The group listened attentively as Captain Choi issued the command. Without hesitation, everyone readied their bows. A flurry of arrows flew forward, piercing through monster bodies and heads, silencing their cries one by one. The first wave fell quickly. Then, a sudden crash followed. An arrow struck a jagged shield, triggering another wave. This time, the lead monster carried a sword and charged with a scream. Seeing this, one of the hunters noted that their shield had appeared. Captain Choi immediately gave the order to fall back and form a defensive line. Everyone raised their shields and braced for the assault. Mokjun stepped forward, using his shield to knock down one of the beasts. Beside him, the round-headed hunter smashed another monster's skull with a heavy mace. The 2 of them charged ahead, tearing through the enemy ranks with controlled fury. Captain Choi then drew his sword, declaring that he would finish the job. In a blur of motion, he severed 2 heads with a single strike and then pushed forward, slicing through the monsters with lethal precision. Alone, he plowed into the horde without hesitation. Meanwhile, Jin Tae-kyung stood back, watching the battle unfold. He was struck by the sheer strength of a C-rank hunter. Captain Choi's movements reminded him of a first-rate warrior from the Murm world. Tae-kyung's eyes narrowed as he surveyed the battlefield. If it were him, how would he handle it? His gaze landed on a monster that had not yet joined the fight. It trembled and seemed ready to flee. The others praised Captain Choi's dominance, claiming he had practically cleared the fight alone. Tae-kyung, however, kept his eyes on that lone creature. He pointed his spear and focused his energy, releasing a subtle killing intent. The monster froze, clearly affected. He gripped his spear tightly and prepared to make his move. However, before he could act, Captain Choi's sword sliced through the monster's head. Tae-kyung stood frozen for a moment, stunned by how fast the captain had reacted. Once the area was secure, Captain Choi called out to Tae-kyung, instructing him to collect the loot. Lost in thought, Tae-kyung delayed his response until the call came again, sharper this time. Snapping out of it, he acknowledged the order and quickly got to work, reminding himself to stay focused. With Tae-kyung gathering supplies, the group advanced deeper into the dungeon. More monsters appeared in the distance, prompting another flurry of movement as everyone rushed to engage. The thrill of battle filled the air. After dispatching this next wave, Captain Choi assigned Tae-kyung to manage the next contract. Tae-kyung responded immediately, eager to keep pace. The cycle continued. They advanced, fought monsters, collected materials, and pressed on. Tae-kyung stayed near the rear, waiting for the captain's signal each time. Whenever called, he answered promptly and fulfilled his tasks. After some time, his bag grew noticeably heavy. He returned to the group and reported the completion of his collection. Mok-jun glanced at him and commented on how efficient he had been. Tae-kyung strapped the bag on his shoulders and replied that it was the least he could do if he wanted to earn a living. Captain Choi raised a hand and praised his work, prompting Tae-kyung to thank him. Soon after, a discussion broke out about finishing quickly so they could head to dinner. Mok-jun expressed hope that Tae-kyung and the rest of the squad could join. Captain Choi calmly responded that he had already eaten at a sushi place. Hearing this, someone else mentioned craving sushi. Tae-kyung, overhearing the casual talk, found it hard to believe. They were on the verge of facing a dungeon boss, yet they talked about dinner with such ease. That level of calm, he thought, must be what defines an expert team. Mok-jun furrowed his brow and suggested they move forward. Captain Choi's tone shifted, instructing everyone to take formation and support Tae-kyung. The group adjusted positions while the gate creaked open. Inside was pitch dark, though a shadowy figure could be seen standing on a raised platform, wielding a weapon and speaking in an unnatural tongue. Tae-kyung observed silently and deduced that this was a magic caster. The round-headed hunter agreed, declaring it was likely the dungeon boss. Shock rippled through the team as they spotted the floor. Dozens of goblin corpses lay scattered, black mist rising from their bodies. Someone shivered, pointing out the lingering gas curling around the dead. From that black mist, a large sphere formed, dense and pulsating. Captain Choi's eyes widened as he realized the threat. Without hesitation, he yelled for the team to retreat. Before they could move, the caped goblin raised its staff. A burst of bright light erupted from its tip, engulfing the group in a blinding flash.